Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to another evening of shared stories and wonder. Tonight, we journey far to the frozen north, to a land of towering mountains and endless forests, where the winter wind howls like a hungry wolf, and the snow falls thick as goose feathers from a sky the color of iron. This is the land of the Norse, the land of Vikings and warriors, of gods and giants, of tales so old they were ancient when your great-great-grandparents were yet to be born. If you enjoy what I do here and want a way to support the channel, then consider checking out my Patreon link down below. But for now, pull your blankets close, settle into your pillows, and let me take you to a place called Frostheim, which means home of frost in the old tongue. It is a small village nestled in a valley between two great mountains, where the people are hardy and the fires burn bright against the endless cold. Now, imagine with me, if you will, a night in the deepest part of winter. The kind of night where the darkness comes early and stays late, where the stars shine like scattered diamonds on black velvet, and where the cold is so fierce it could freeze the very words in your throat before they reach your lips. On this particular night, a storm has descended upon the village of Frostheim with all the fury of the old gods themselves. The wind screams through the valley like a chorus of banshees, hurling snow and ice against anything foolish enough to stand in its path. The trees bend and groan under the weight of it, their branches creaking like the bones of ancient giants. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howl their hunger to the uncaring sky, their voices rising and falling with the gusts of wind that sweep across the frozen landscape. But here, my friends, in the great mead hall at the heart of Frostheim, all is warmth and comfort and the golden glow of firelight. The mead hall is called Bjornstead, which means the place of the bear, and it has stood in this spot for longer than anyone can remember. Its walls are built of massive logs, each one as thick as a man is tall, fitted together so tightly that not even the most determined winter wind can find a way through. The roof is peaked high, covered in overlapping wooden shingles that are themselves buried under a blanket of snow so thick it acts as another layer of insulation against the cold. Inside, the air is warm and rich with the most wonderful smells you could imagine on such a bitter night. There is the sharp, earthy scent of wood smoke from the great fire pit that runs down the center of the hall, where logs as long as a fishing boat crackle and pop and send showers of orange sparks dancing up toward the smoke hole in the roof. There is the savory aroma of roasting meat, a whole pig turning slowly on a spit over the flames, its skin growing golden and crispy, while its juices drip and sizzle into the fire below. There is the sweet, honeyed fragrance of warm mead, that most beloved of Norse drinks, made from fermented honey and spiced with cinnamon and cloves and things whose names have been forgotten by all but the oldest grandmothers. The hall is filled with people tonight, for no one in their right mind would stay in their own small houses during a storm like this. Better to gather together, to share warmth and food and company. to wait out the fury of the weather in the safety of numbers and the comfort of community. Along the walls of the hall, great wooden benches are arranged, carved with intricate patterns of intertwining serpents and leaping stags and sailing ships with dragon prows. Upon these benches sit the folk of Frostheim, wrapped in furs and woolen cloaks, their faces ruddy from the fire's warmth, and perhaps from a few cups of mead as well. There are fishermen with hands roughened by rope and salt water, their beards still carrying the faint smell of the sea. There are farmers with broad shoulders and patient eyes, men and women who know the rhythm of the seasons as intimately as they know their own heartbeats. There are craftspeople of all sorts, weavers and smiths and carpenters, their fingers clever and their minds sharp. And there are children, of course, for what is a mead hall on a stormy night without children? They sit cross-legged on the rush-covered floor near the fire pit, their eyes wide with wonder and anticipation, their faces sticky with honey from the sweet cakes their mothers gave them to keep them quiet. Some of the littlest ones have already begun to nod, their heads drooping toward their chests as the warmth and the fullness of their bellies work their gentle magic. But most are alert and eager, for they know what is coming. They know that on nights like this, when the storm rages and the fire burns bright, old Bjorn Thundervoice will tell his tales. Bjorn Thundervoice is the village skald, which is the Norse word for a poet and storyteller, a keeper of histories and a singer of songs. He is an old man now, his hair and beard as white as the snow that piles against the walls outside, but there is nothing weak or feeble about him. He sits in his special chair near the fire, a chair carved all over with images of ravens and wolves and the great ash tree that holds the worlds together. His eyes are the pale blue of glacier ice, and though they have grown cloudy with age, they still carry a spark of mischief and wisdom that makes people lean forward when he speaks. Bjorn has seen more winters than anyone else in the village, more winters than most people can count. He has traveled far in his youth, or sailed on long ships to distant shores, walked in the halls of jarls and kings, heard stories from the lips of other skalds who heard them from their masters, who heard them from theirs, all the way back to the beginning of memory itself. The tales he carries in his heart are older than the mountains, older than the sea, older perhaps than the stars themselves. Tonight, Bjorn wears his finest cloak, a heavy thing of blue wool trimmed with white fox fur, fastened at his shoulder with a bronze brooch shaped like a coiled serpent. Around his neck hangs a pendant of amber, the color of honey held up to firelight, and within the amber, if you look closely, you can see the tiny preserved form of a fly that lived and died in some ancient forest long before the first humans walked the earth. The old skald takes a long drink from his mead horn, a beautiful thing made from the horn of an aurochs and banded with silver. He wipes his lips with the back of his weathered hand and looks out over the assembled villagers with those ice-blue eyes. The chatter in the hall gradually dies away as people notice his gaze, as they sense that the time has come. Even the youngest children fall silent or are hushed by their parents with gentle hands. Outside, The wind screams and howls, rattling the heavy wooden doors in their frames. The fire crackles and pops, sending a cascade of sparks swirling up toward the smoke hole. Somewhere in the rafters above, a raven croaks, one of the several that make their home in Bjornsted, bold black birds that the villagers consider good luck, for they are sacred to the All-Father himself. Bjorn Thundervoice clears his throat, and when he speaks, his voice rolls out across the hall like distant thunder, like waves breaking on a rocky shore, like the deep rumble of a glacier moving through a mountain pass. It is a voice made for telling tales, rich and resonant, carrying easily to every corner of the great hall despite the howling of the storm outside. "My friends," he begins, and already the children lean forward. "My dear friends and neighbors, gathered here in warmth and fellowship while the winter wolf prowls outside our walls. What a night this is! What a perfect night for the old stories." He pauses, letting his words settle over the crowd like a warm blanket. "I have told you many tales over the years, have I not? Tales of brave warriors and cunning heroes, of beautiful maidens and terrible monsters, of treasure won and treasure lost. But tonight, my friends, tonight I feel the pull of something older, something deeper. Tonight, while the storm rages and the fire burns, I would tell you of the very beginning of all things. I would tell you of the gods themselves, of how the worlds were made, and of the great tree that holds them all together like fruit hanging from its branches." A murmur of appreciation runs through the hall. This is what they came for. This is why they braved the cold and the wind to gather here tonight. Not just for the warmth and the mead and the company, though those things are precious enough. They came for this, for the old stories, for the tales that connect them to their ancestors and their ancestors' ancestors, all the way back to the first folk who huddled around fires and looked up at the stars and wondered. A young boy near the front, perhaps 7 or 8 winters old, with a shock of red hair and a face full of freckles, raises his hand tentatively. "Yes, young Eric," Bjorn says, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Will you tell us about Thor?" the boy asks eagerly. "About his hammer and how he fights the giants?" "In time, young one, in time," Bjorn chuckles. "But first we must go back to the very beginning, before there was a Thor to speak of, before there was an Odin or a Freya, or any of the gods we know. We must go back to a time before time itself, to a place that was not quite a place, to the great emptiness that existed before existence began." He takes another sip of mead, letting the anticipation build. "Close your eyes, my friends, if you wish. Let the warmth of the fire and the sound of my voice carry you away from this hall, away from this storm, away from this moment. Let me take you to the beginning of everything. Let me take you to the yawning void that the wise ones call Ginnunga Gap. The fire crackles, the wind howls, the children close their eyes, and even some of the adults do the same, letting themselves sink into the old scald spell. I know, in the beginning," Bjorn says, his voice dropping to something softer, something almost reverent. "There was nothing, nothing at all. No earth beneath your feet, no sky above your head, no sun to warm your face or stars to guide your way. There was only the gap, The great emptiness, a void so vast and so complete that it is almost impossible for us to imagine. Ginnunga Gap, they called it, which means the gaping void or the yawning abyss. A place of utter stillness, utter silence, utter dark. He pauses, and in that pause the only sounds are the crackling of the fire and the distant howling of the wind, and somehow those sounds make the silence he describes feel more real, more present. But at the edges of this void, at the very boundaries of nothingness, there were two realms. To the north lay Niflheim, the world of ice and mist and freezing cold. Imagine the coldest winter you have ever known, the most bitter frost, the most piercing wind. Now imagine something 1,000 times colder, a cold so deep and so complete that it would freeze the very blood in your veins, would freeze your thoughts in your head, would freeze time itself. That was Niflheim, a place of endless winter, where great rivers of ice flowed from a frozen spring, and glaciers ground slowly through valleys that had never known warmth. A child shivers, and whether it is from the tale or from a draft that has found its way through the wall, no one can say. And to the south, Bjorn continues, lay Muspelheim, the world of fire and flame and searing heat. Imagine the hottest summer day, the fiercest forge, the most terrible wildfire. Now imagine something 1,000 times hotter, a heat so intense that it would burn the very air you breathe, would melt stone like butter in a pan, would consume everything it touched. That was Muspelheim, a place of eternal burning, where flames danced without fuel and rivers of molten rock flowed like water. And standing guard over this realm of fire was Surtur, a giant of flame and fury, bearing a sword that blazed brighter than the sun. The fire in the hall seems to burn a little brighter as Bjorn speaks of Muspelheim, as if in sympathy with its distant kin. These two realms, ice and fire, cold and heat, existed on opposite sides of the great void, and for ages upon ages they simply were. They did not change, did not grow, did not interact. They simply existed, eternal and unchanging, separated by the vast emptiness of Ginnunga Gap. Bjorn leans forward in his chair, his ice-blue eyes reflecting the firelight. But nothing, my friends, not even nothing itself, can last forever. And in time, something began to happen. The cold mists of Niflheim began to drift southward across the void, carried by winds that had no name, and the heat of Muspelheim began to reach northward, waves of warmth pushing against the endless dark. And in the center of Ginnunga Gap, where ice and fire met for the first time, something miraculous occurred. He pauses, letting the moment stretch. But that, my dear friends, is a tale for the next part of our story. For now, let us rest in this moment, in this warmth, in this place between the beginning and what came after. Let us remember that all things have their origin somewhere, even the gods themselves. And let us be grateful for the fire that burns before us, and the roof that keeps out the storm, for these are no small blessings in a world where ice and fire once met in the great void and brought forth all that we know. A log shifts in the fire pit, sending up another shower of sparks. Somewhere, a baby fusses and is soothed by its mother's gentle rocking. The wind continues to howl outside, but somehow it seems more distant now, less threatening, as if the old stories have created a barrier of warmth and wonder that even the fiercest storm cannot penetrate. Bjorn Thundervoice takes another drink of mead and settles back in his carved chair, a smile playing across his weathered face. The tale has begun, and there is so much more to tell. Bjorn Thundervoice lets the silence settle over the hall for a long moment, watching the faces of his listeners in the firelight. The children are utterly still now, their earlier restlessness forgotten, their eyes fixed on the old scold with the intensity of young hawks watching their prey. Even the adults have leaned forward on their benches, their cups of mead forgotten in their hands, caught up in the spell of the ancient tale. Now then, Bjorn continues, his voice rolling out like gentle thunder, where were we? Ah, yes, the meeting of ice and fire in the great void of Ginnungagap. This, my friends, is where the true wonder begins. He gestures with one weathered hand, painting pictures in the air that his listeners can almost see. Imagine the scene if you can. The frozen mists of Niflheim drifting across the endless dark, so cold that they crackled and sang as they moved. And from the south the scorching breath of Muspelheim reaching out like greedy fingers, so hot that the very darkness seemed to glow where it touched. And in the middle of the void, in that place where neither ice nor fire held complete sway, these two opposite forces met for the first time since the beginning of all things. The fire in the hall pops loudly, as if punctuating his words. When ice meets fire, my friends, what happens? You know this from your own lives. The ice melts, does it not? It transforms from solid to liquid, from stillness to motion. And that is precisely what happened in Ginnungagap, though on a scale far greater than anything we could ever witness in our small world. The ice began to melt, drip by drip, drop by drop, forming pools and rivers of water that had never existed before. And in that water, warmed by the fires of Muspelheim, something miraculous stirred to life. Bjorn pauses, and when he speaks again, his voice carries a note of awe that is entirely genuine, despite the hundreds of times he has told this tale. From the melting ice, from the meeting of cold and heat, a being took shape. Not a god, not yet. Something older and stranger and more powerful than any god that would come after. This was Ymir, the first of all giants, and his name means the screamer or the groaner, for the sounds he made as he emerged from the primordial ice echoed across the void like nothing before or since. A child whimpers softly, and Bjorn gentles his voice. Do not fear, little one. Ymir was not evil, not in the way we think of evil. He simply was. He was the first life, the first consciousness to exist in a universe that had known nothing but emptiness and the eternal war of ice and fire. He was huge beyond imagining, larger than mountains, larger than the lands themselves would one day be. And he was alone in all the void, the only living thing in an infinity of nothing. The old skald takes a moment to wet his throat with mead before continuing. But Ymir was not destined to remain alone for long. From the same melting ice that had birthed him came another creature, one nearly as wondrous as Ymir himself. This was Audhumla, the great cow, a beast of such size that her udders could have filled oceans. Her hide was the color of fresh milk, and her eyes were gentle and patient as the eyes of cows always are. She was the nurturer, the provider, the mother of sustenance in a universe that had never known such things. Bjorn smiles at a young girl who is clutching a carved wooden cow toy to her chest. Audhumla gave milk, you see. Rivers of warm, sweet milk that flowed from her udders and nourished the giant Ymir, giving him strength and life. And while she fed him, she herself needed sustenance, for even magical cosmic cows must eat. So Audhumla turned to the great blocks of salty ice that still filled much of the void, and she began to lick them with her great rough tongue. She licked and licked hour after hour, day after day, though there were no hours or days yet to count. The fire crackles, and somewhere in the rafters, one of the ravens shifts on its perch with a soft rustle of feathers. And as Audhumla licked the ice, something remarkable happened. Her warm tongue melted the frozen surface little by little, and slowly, ever so slowly, a shape began to emerge from within the ice. First came hair, long and golden as summer wheat, then a forehead noble and high, then a face handsome and strong, unlike the rough features of Ymir. By the end of the first day of licking, for we might as well speak of days even if they did not truly exist yet, the head of a man had emerged from the ice. Bjorn holds up one finger. By the end of the second day, his shoulders and chest were free, broad and powerful, the chest of a warrior and a king. And by the end of the third day, the whole man stood free of the ice that had imprisoned him, stepping forth into the void as the second conscious being to exist besides Ymir himself. His name was Buri, which means producer or father, and he was beautiful and terrible and filled with a light that the void had never known. The children lean forward, sensing that the story is building towards something important. Now, Buri needed no mate to continue his line, for in those early days, the rules of life and creation had not yet been written. He simply brought forth a son from himself, a being named Bor, who was as mighty as his father, but perhaps a touch more human in his needs. And Bor, unlike his father, did seek a companion. He found her among the giants, for by this time Ymir had been busy, and from his sweat and from the meeting of his limbs as he slept, new giants had been born, a whole race of them, some monstrous and some fair. Bjorn's voice takes on a warmer tone. Bor wed a giantess named Bestla, and she was one of the fair ones, beautiful in the way that mountains are beautiful, in the way that glaciers are beautiful, vast and ancient and touched with a terrible majesty. And from their union came 3 sons who would change everything, who would take the raw chaos of the void and shape it into the worlds we know today. He holds up 3 fingers, counting them off slowly. The first son was Odin, who would become the All-Father, the king of all the gods, the seeker of wisdom and the lord of war and death and poetry. The second was Vili, whose name means will, and who would give consciousness and intelligence to the first humans. The third was V, whose name means holiness, and who would give the gift of the senses, the ability to see and hear and feel the wonders of creation. The old skald's voice drops to something almost conspiratorial. Now, these three brothers looked upon the universe as it was, and they were not pleased. All they could see was Ymir, vast and primordial, and his countless giant children spreading through the void, and the great cow Audomla still patiently licking at her ice. There was no order, no beauty, no purpose, just existence without meaning, life without direction. And the three brothers, young and full of fire and ambition, decided to change this. A log shifts in the fire pit with a shower of sparks, and several children jump. They slew Ymir. The words hang in the air heavy with significance. Oh, it was not murder as we understand it, my friends. It was more like surgery, like the cutting away of the old so that the new might grow. The three brothers fell upon the primordial giant with all their strength and cunning, and after a battle that shook the very foundations of nothingness, Ymir fell, and from his body, from his flesh and bones and blood, Odin and his brothers built the worlds. Bjorn spreads his arms wide, encompassing everything. From Ymir's flesh, they made the earth, the solid ground beneath our feet, every mountain and valley and plain that exists in all the 9 worlds. From his blood, they made the seas and the lakes and the rivers, all the waters that flow and crash and sustain life. His blood was so vast that when it poured forth, it drowned nearly all of the giant race, save for one named Bergelmir and his wife, who escaped on a hollowed log and became the ancestors of all giants that live today. The old skald's hands move as he speaks, shaping the world from air. From Ymir's bones, they raised the mountains, those great stone spires that reach toward the sky. From his teeth and the shattered pieces of his bones, they made the rocks and boulders and pebbles. From his hair they made the trees and all the growing things that cover the earth in green. And from his skull, imagine it, from the vast dome of his skull they made the sky itself, that great blue ceiling that arches over everything. A child gasps in wonder, looking up at the rafters of the mead hall as if trying to glimpse the skull sky beyond. But the sky needed to be held up lest it fall and crush all that had been made. So the brothers placed 4 dwarves at the 4 corners of the world, strong little beings named Nordri, Sudri, Ostri, and Vestri, which are simply the names for north, south, east, and west. And these 4 dwarves hold up the sky to this very day, patient and eternal, their broad shoulders bearing a weight that would crush mountains. Bjorn chuckles softly. As for Ymir's brains, well, the brothers took those and cast them up into the sky, where they became the clouds that drift and change and bring us rain and snow. So when you see clouds scudding across the heavens, my friends, you are seeing the thoughts of the first giant, still wandering even after all these ages. The fire pops and crackles, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the mead hall. But a world is nothing without light, and so far the brothers had created only a vast dark expanse of land and sea and sky. So they traveled south to Muspelheim, to the realm of fire, where Surtur still stands guard with his flaming sword, and they gathered sparks and embers and glowing coals. These they cast up into the skull sky, where they became the stars, those countless points of light that guide sailors and comfort children on dark nights. Bjorn points upward, and everyone in the hall can imagine those ancient sparks still burning overhead. For the sun and the moon, the brothers chose two particularly bright and beautiful sparks, larger and more radiant than all the others. They set these in chariots that race across the sky, pulled by swift horses that never tire. The sun chariot is driven by a maiden named Sul, and the moon chariot by her brother Mani. And they race endlessly, day after day, night after night, because behind them come great wolves, Skoll, who chases the sun, and Hati, who pursues the moon, ever hungry, ever hunting, waiting for the day when they will finally catch their prey. A child shivers, and her mother pulls her closer. But that day, Bjorn says reassuringly, is not yet come, and will not come for ages upon ages. For now, the sun rises and sets, and the moon waxes and wanes, and the world the brothers built turns in its eternal dance. The old skald settles back in his chair, his eyes distant. Now, with the worlds made from Ymir's body, the brothers needed to give them shape and order. And here we come to the great tree, my friends, the mightiest living thing that has ever existed or ever will exist. I speak of Yggdrasil, the World Tree, the ash that holds all 9 worlds in its branches and roots and trunk. His voice takes on a reverent quality. Yggdrasil is beyond imagining. Its trunk rises through the center of everything, so vast that the mightiest ocean could fit in one of its bark furrows. Its branches spread out to cover the sky, reaching into realms of pure light that no mortal eye has ever seen. And its roots, its 3 great roots, plunge down into the deepest wells of existence, drinking from sources of wisdom and fate and memory. Bjorn begins to count on his fingers. 9 worlds hang in the branches of Yggdrasil like fruit on an apple tree. At the very top is Asgard, the home of the Aesir gods, where Odin rules from his high seat and where the great hall of Valhalla stands ready to receive the honored dead. This is a place of golden palaces and rainbow bridges, of eternal feasting and glorious battle. He moves to the next finger. Below Asgard lies Vanaheim, home of the Vanir, the other tribe of gods, beings of fertility and nature and sea and wealth. The Vanir are older in some ways than the Aesir, wilder and more connected to the growing things of the earth. And next to Vanaheim is Alfheim, the realm of light elves, beings of such beauty and grace that to look upon them is to forget your own name. The children are rapt, their imaginations painting pictures of these wondrous realms. In the middle of the tree, along its great trunk, lies Midgard, the middle world, our world, the realm of humans. Midgard is connected to Asgard by the rainbow bridge called Bifrost, which the gods may cross, but which is guarded against giants and other unwelcome visitors. Next to Midgard is Jotunheim, the land of the giants, a place of towering mountains and freezing winds and beings of immense power. Bjorn's voice drops slightly as he continues. There is Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves, lying in the roots and caverns of the world, where master craftsmen forge wonders by the light of their forges, And there is Niflheim, which you remember, the world of ice and mist that existed even before creation, now home to the dishonored dead who did not earn a place in the halls of the gods. His voice grows darker still. Deepest of all is Helheim, the realm of the dead, ruled by Hel herself, a goddess who is half beautiful woman and half rotting corpse. This is where most souls go when they die, not to punishment necessarily, but to a grey and quiet existence, waiting for the end of all things. And finally, far to the south, still burning as it always has, is Muspelheim, the realm of fire, where Surtur waits with his flaming sword for the day of Ragnarok. The name falls heavily in the warm air of the mead hall, and even the fire seems to dim slightly at its utterance. But we shall speak more of that another time, Bjorn says quickly, his voice brightening. For now, let us return to happier subjects. The worlds were made, the tree was grown, but something was missing. The brothers looked upon their creation and saw that it was beautiful but empty. It needed people to appreciate it, to walk its forests and sail its seas and tell stories around its fires. He smiles warmly. So Odin and his brothers walked along the shore of the newly made sea, and there they found 2 logs of driftwood washed up on the sand. One was ash, and one was elm, the 2 most noble of trees. And the brothers looked upon these logs and saw not dead wood, but potential, not refuse, but raw material for their greatest creation yet. Bjorn's voice grows gentle. Odin gave them breath and life, the spark that separates the living from the dead. Vili gave them consciousness and movement, the ability to think and to act upon their thoughts. And Ve gave them form and senses, the ability to see the world they had been made to inhabit, to hear its sounds and feel its textures and taste its fruits. And when the brothers were done, 2 human beings stood upon the shore, blinking in the light of their first day. The old skald pauses, letting the image settle in his listeners' minds. The man they named Ask, which means ash tree, for that was the wood from which he had been made. The woman they named Embla, which means elm tree. And from these 2, from Ask and Embla, came all of humanity, every man and woman and child that has ever lived or ever will live. You and I, my friends, we are all children of the driftwood, shaped by the hands of gods, carrying within us the breath of Odin and the consciousness of Vili and the senses given by Ve. Bjorn spreads his arms wide. And that, my dear listeners, is how the worlds were made. From the meeting of ice and fire came Ymir. From his body came the earth and sky. From the will of 3 brothers came order and beauty. And from 2 logs on a beach came the ancestors of us all. He reaches for his mead horn and takes a long, satisfied drink. But the worlds once made did not stand still. The gods had their dramas and their adventures, their triumphs and their tragedies. And the greatest of all the gods, the one who set all this in motion, was Odin Allfather himself. Would you hear of his quest for wisdom, children? Of the prices he paid for knowledge that even the gods do not possess by right? The children nod eagerly, and even the adults murmur their assent. Outside, the storm continues to rage, but inside the mead hall of Bjornsted, the fire burns warm, and the tales flow like honey. Then settle in, Bjorn says with a smile, for the All-Father's story is one of sacrifice and suffering and rewards beyond measure. The fire has burned down somewhat, and one of the older men rises to add fresh logs to the flames. The interruption is brief, but welcome, giving the listeners a moment to shift on their benches, to take sips of their mead, to whisper excitedly to one another about the wonders they have heard. The children especially are buzzing with energy despite the late hour, their eyes bright with visions of primordial giants and cosmic cows and worlds hung like fruit on an impossible tree. Bjorn Thundervoice waits patiently, using the pause to rest his voice and gather his thoughts. When the fire is blazing merrily once again, and the hall has settled back into attentive silence, he begins anew. Now we speak of Odin, he says, and his voice carries a weight of reverence that was not present in his earlier words. Odin, whom we call the All-Father, for he is the father of gods and men alike. Odin, who sits upon his high seat Hlidskjalf in golden Asgard, from which he can see everything that happens in all the 9 worlds. Odin, who rules the Aesir with wisdom and cunning, who decides the fates of battles, who welcomes the worthy dead to his hall of Valhalla. The old skald leans forward, his ice-blue eyes reflecting the dancing flames. But Odin was not always as wise as he is now. Oh, he was clever from the beginning, to be sure. He was the one who conceived the plan to slay Ymir and build the worlds from his body. He was the leader of his brothers, the driving force behind creation itself. But wisdom, true wisdom, is not something even a god is born with. Wisdom must be earned, and the price of true wisdom is always higher than you expect. Bjorn settles back in his carved chair. Let me tell you first of Odin, as he appears to those who are blessed or cursed to see him. He is tall, taller than any mortal man, with shoulders broad enough to bear the weight of all the worlds. His hair and beard are grey as storm clouds, and they flow around his face like smoke. He wears a great blue cloak that billows behind him even when there is no wind, and upon his head sits a wide-brimmed hat that casts shadows over his face. The fire crackles, and the shadows in the hall seem to deepen. But it is his eye that you notice most. Yes, eye singular, for Odin has only one. Where his right eye should be, there is only an empty socket, a darkness that seems somehow deeper than mere absence. This is the first sign of the prices Odin has paid for wisdom, but we shall come to that story in time. Bjorn raises one hand, and perched upon it, in the listener's imagination, are 2 dark shapes. Upon Odin's shoulders sit 2 ravens, black as midnight, clever as foxes, ancient as the mountains. Their names are Hugin and Munin, which mean thought and memory. Every day at dawn, these ravens fly forth from Asgard, traveling across all the 9 worlds, seeing everything that happens, hearing every word that is spoken. And every evening they return to Odin's shoulders and whisper into his ears all that they have learned. A child glances nervously at the ravens in the rafters of the mead hall, wondering if perhaps they too are spies for the All-Father. Through Hugin and Munin, Odin knows much of what passes in the worlds, but even this is not enough for him. Knowledge drives him like hunger drives the wolf, like thirst drives the wanderer in the desert. He is never satisfied, never content, always seeking more. And it was this unquenchable thirst that led him to his greatest sacrifices. Bjorn's voice drops to something almost hushed. The first sacrifice happened at the beginning of time, not long after the worlds were made, and the gods had established themselves in Asgard. Beneath one of the great roots of Yggdrasil, there is a well, a pool of water so still and so clear that it reflects not just what is above it, but what was and what will be. This is Mimir's well, named for its guardian, and it is said that whoever drinks from its waters will gain wisdom beyond measure. He pauses, letting the image form in his listeners' minds. Mimir was ancient even then, one of the oldest beings in existence, possessed of knowledge that even Odin lacked. He sat beside his well in the perpetual twilight beneath Yggdrasil's roots, watching the waters, keeping his own counsel. And when Odin came to him, asking for a drink from the well, Mimir looked up with eyes that had seen the birth of giants and the death of primordial beings, and he named his price. Bjorn touches his own eye socket gently. An eye. That was the price Mimir demanded, not gold, not treasure, not service or promises. An eye. For wisdom, Mimir said, requires sacrifice, and the greater the wisdom sought, the greater the sacrifice required. To see everything, you must first give up something of your sight. The children gasp softly, and even some of the adults look troubled. Did Odin hesitate? Perhaps for a moment. Even gods feel pain, feel loss, feel the terror of permanent diminishment. But Odin's thirst for wisdom was greater than his fear of suffering. Without a word, he reached up to his own face and plucked out his eye, blood streaming down his cheek and into his grey beard, and he cast it into the well. It sank down through those crystal waters, and there it remains to this day, gazing up from the depths, seeing things that no other eye can see. Bjorn takes a drink of mead, giving his listeners a moment to absorb this image. Mimir dipped his drinking horn into the well and handed it to Odin, and the Allfather drank deep. What he saw in those waters, what knowledge flooded into his mind, no one can say for certain. But when Odin rose from that well, he was changed. He walked differently, spoke differently, saw the world with that single remaining eye in a way he never had, with two. He had glimpsed the future, they say, including the terrible end that awaits gods and men alike. And yet he did not despair. Instead, he set about preparing, gathering knowledge and warriors and power against the day that he knew must come. The old skald shifts in his chair, and his voice takes on an even more solemn tone. But even the wisdom of Mimir's well was not enough for Odin. There was another kind of knowledge he craved, a power that not even the wisest of beings possessed. I speak of the runes, those sacred symbols that hold power over reality itself. You have seen runes carved into weapons and tools, and the stones that mark the graves of the honored dead. But the runes I speak of are the true runes, the original runes, the ones from which all magic flows. Bjorn traces shapes in the air with one gnarled finger. The runes were not created. They simply are, like the laws that govern the falling of snow and the rising of the sun. They existed before the gods, before the giants, before Ymir himself. They float in the spaces between things, in the gaps in existence visible only to those with the wisdom and the will to perceive them. And Odin, having drunk from Mimir's well, knew that they existed. But knowing they exist and being able to use them are two very different things. The fire pops, and a log settles with a soft thump. To gain the runes, Odin would need to sacrifice again. But this time, the sacrifice would not be a part of his body. This time, he would need to sacrifice himself. A collective intake of breath runs through the hall. There came a night when Odin walked alone to Yggdrasil, the World Tree, and he gazed up at its impossible height, up through the branches that hold the worlds, up into the darkness that lies beyond even the highest realms. And then, with steady hands, he took his spear Gungnir, that weapon which never misses its mark, and he wounded himself with it, opening a gash in his own side that let his divine blood flow. Bjorn's voice is barely above a whisper now, and every soul in the hall leans forward to hear. Then Odin climbed the tree. He climbed until he found a branch strong enough to bear his weight, and there he hung himself. He looped a rope around his neck and let himself fall, so that he dangled there between life and death, between the worlds, suspended in agony and darkness. And he forbade anyone, god or mortal or any other being, from giving him food or water or any form of aid. The old skald pauses, and the silence is absolute. For 9 days and 9 nights, Odin hung on that tree. 9 is a sacred number, you know. 9 worlds, 9 nights, 9 daughters of the sea god. There is power in 9s. And for each of those 9 days and 9 nights, Odin suffered agonies that would have destroyed any mortal being instantly. The wound in his side would not close. The rope around his neck would not quite strangle him. He hung there, dying without dying, screaming without voice, alone in the darkness between existence and oblivion. A child begins to whimper, and her mother pulls her close, stroking her hair, but Odin did not break. Through the pain, through the thirst, through the loneliness and the despair, he kept his focus. He stared into the darkness, searching, seeking, waiting. And on the 9th night, at the darkest hour, when his spirit had been stripped of everything that was not essential, he finally saw them. Bjorn's voice rises, taking on a note of triumph. The runes, they rose up from the darkness below him, glowing with a light that was not light, symbols of power that predated the gods themselves. Odin looked upon them, and with his last strength, he reached out and grasped them, pulling them into himself, making them his own. And in that moment, with a great cry that echoed across all 9 worlds, he fell from the tree. The fire blazes up suddenly, as if responding to the story, and several people cry out in surprise. But Odin did not die. The knowledge of the runes filled him, healed him, transformed him. He rose from the roots of Yggdrasil, reborn, no longer merely the king of the gods, but something more. He was now the master of magic, the lord of runes, the wanderer between worlds who could bend reality itself to his will. The sacrifice had been accepted, and the reward was beyond price. Bjorn settles back, his voice returning to its normal register. From that day forward, Odin has been the god of wisdom, of magic, of poetry, of war, of death. He is called by many names: the one-eyed, the hanged god, the rune master, the wanderer, the father of victories. He walks among mortals sometimes, disguised as an old man in a blue cloak and wide hat, testing their hospitality, rewarding the worthy, punishing the cruel. Some say he walks among us still, watching, judging, preparing for what is to come. The old skald looks out over his audience with a gentle smile, and that is why, my friends, we always welcome strangers to our halls and offer them food and drink and shelter. For you never know when the old man at your door might be more than he appears. The beggar might be a god, the wanderer might be the Allfather himself, and those who show kindness to strangers may find themselves blessed beyond measure. A murmur of agreement runs through the hall. This is a lesson they all know, have heard since childhood, but hearing it in the context of Odin's sacrifice gives it new weight. Now, Bjorn continues, his tone lightening, Odin does not sit alone in golden Asgard. He has a wife, the goddess Frigg, who is as wise as he is in her own way, and who knows the fates of all beings, even if she rarely speaks of them. He has many children, gods and goddesses of various powers and domains. But his greatest hall, the one that most concerns warriors and heroes, is Valhalla, the hall of the slain. The children perk up at this. For what young person does not dream of glory and honor? Valhalla is immense beyond imagining. Its rafters are made from spears, its roof tiles from golden shields that gleam in the light of fires that never go out. It has 540 doors, each so wide that 800 warriors could march through them shoulder to shoulder. And every day those doors open to admit the souls of warriors who have died bravely in battle, who have been chosen by Odin's servants to join his eternal army. Bjorn's voice takes on a note of longing that is not entirely feigned. I.e., inside Valhalla, the chosen warriors feast on the meat of a magical boar called Sarimnir, who is slaughtered and cooked each day and rises whole again each night. They drink mead that flows from the udders of a goat named Hydron, who feeds on the leaves of Yggdrasil itself. And when they have eaten and drunk their fill, they go out into the courtyard of Valhalla and they fight. He smiles at the confused looks on some faces. Yes, fight. They battle each other with sword and axe and spear, killing and dying over and over again, for in Valhalla no death is permanent. When evening comes, the slain rise again, their wounds healed, and they return to the great hall to feast once more. This is the afterlife of the warrior, eternal battle and eternal feasting, preparing for the day when Odin will need every sword arm he can muster. A young man near the back of the hall touches the sword at his hip, his eyes distant, imagining himself in those golden halls. But let us not forget that Odin also has a steed, the most remarkable horse in all the 9 worlds. His name is Sleipnir, and he has 8 legs, not 4, which allow him to gallop faster than the wind, faster than thought itself. Sleipnir can run across water and air as easily as land, can travel between the worlds in the blink of an eye. There is no place in all the 9 realms that Sleipnir cannot carry his master. Bjorn chuckles softly. The story of how Sleipnir came to be is a strange one indeed, involving Loki the trickster and a giant stallion, but that is a tale for another time. What matters now is that you understand Odin as he is, a god of tremendous power and even more tremendous wisdom, who has paid dearly for everything he knows, and who watches over the worlds with his single eye, preparing for the battle that will end all things. The old skald looks toward the rafters, where the ravens sit watching. Perhaps Hugin and Munin are listening now, ready to fly back to their master and tell him of a mead hall full of good people listening to the old stories. If so, I hope they carry word that we honor him, that we remember his sacrifices, that we strive to be worthy of the gifts he has given. He turns back to his audience. But wisdom and magic are not the only powers in Asgard. There is also strength, raw and thunderous and unstoppable. And that brings us to another god, one whom you have been waiting to hear about since young Eric asked his question at the beginning of our tale. The red-haired boy straightens up eagerly. "Yes, my friends," Bjorn says with a grin. "Now we speak of Thor." Young Eric cannot contain himself any longer. He bounces on his seat with excitement, his freckled face split by a grin so wide it must hurt. Several of the other children are equally animated, for Thor is the god of common folk, the protector of humanity, the one they call upon when storms rage and when danger threatens. Odin may be wiser and more powerful in subtle ways, but Thor is the hero of 1,000 tales, the thunder in the sky, the strength that stands between mankind and the chaos that would consume them. Bjorn Thundervoice raises a hand for quiet, though his eyes twinkle with amusement at the children's enthusiasm. "Thor," he begins, and even the name seems to roll like thunder from his lips. "Thor Odinson, god of thunder, god of storms, protector of both Asgard and Midgard. Where Odin is cunning, Thor is direct. Where Odin schemes and plans, Thor acts. He is the storm that breaks upon the mountains, the lightning that splits the sky, the thunder that makes the earth itself tremble." The old skald pauses, gathering the image in his mind. Picture him, if you will. Thor is not tall like his father, but he is broad, broader than any man or god in all the 9 worlds. His shoulders are like the beams of this mead hall, thick and strong enough to support any weight. His arms are roped with muscle, his hands large enough to crush stones into powder. His hair is red as copper, red as autumn leaves, red as the heart of a forge fire, and his beard is the same, bristling and wild and magnificent. A few of the red-haired children in the audience straighten up proudly, and Bjorn winks at them. And those eyes, blue as summer sky, but not the gentle blue of a peaceful day. Thor's eyes are the blue at the heart of lightning, fierce and wild and crackling with power. When he is angry, they say you can see actual sparks dancing in their depths. And when Thor is angry, the wise run for cover. The fire in the hall crackles particularly loudly, and several children jump, then laugh nervously. But for all his fearsome appearance, Thor has a good heart. He is the friend of mankind, the one who keeps the giants at bay, the one who defends the weak against the strong. He loves food and drink, loves a good fight and a good feast afterward, loves his wife Sif and his children, and even, in his own way, his troublesome blood brother Loki. He is quick to anger, but equally quick to forgive. He is not clever, not by the standards of gods, but he is honest and brave and true, and those qualities have served him well. Bjorn reaches out as if grasping something from the air. But we cannot speak of Thor without speaking of his weapon, the most famous hammer in all the 9 worlds. I speak of Mjolnir, whose name means the crusher or the grinder, forged by dwarven smiths in the fires beneath the earth. The children lean forward, their eyes wide. Mjolnir is not a large hammer, not by the standards of such things. It would fit in a mortal's hand, though no mortal could lift it. Its head is made of uru metal, a substance that exists nowhere but in the hearts of dying stars, stronger than any other material in existence. Its handle is shorter than it should be, the result of mischief during its forging. But we shall come to that story later. What matters is what Mjolnir can do. Bjorn's voice takes on a note of wonder. When Thor throws Mjolnir, it never misses its target. Never. It will fly through walls, through mountains, through the very fabric of reality if necessary, and it will strike what Thor intends it to strike. And once it has struck, once it has crushed whatever enemy Thor aimed it at, it will return to his hand, flying back through the air like a faithful hound returning to its master. He pauses for effect, but that is not all. Mjolnir is the source of Thor's power over storms. When he swings it, thunder rolls across the sky. When he strikes with it, lightning answers. When he throws it, the wind follows in its wake like soldiers following their general. With Mjolnir in his hand, Thor can summon tempests that would scour mountains clean, can call down lightning that would melt the strongest fortress, can shake the very foundations of the earth. A child tugs at his mother's sleeve. Can Thor fly? He whispers, loud enough for half the hall to hear. Bjorn smiles. An excellent question, young one. Thor cannot fly as a bird flies, but he can throw Mjolnir into the sky and hold on to its handle as it soars, letting it carry him wherever he needs to go. Imagine that, holding onto a hammer as it hurtles through the clouds, lightning crackling around you, the wind screaming past your ears. That is how Thor travels when he is in a hurry. The image seems to delight the children and adults alike. Now Thor does not rely on Mjolnir alone. He has other treasures that increase his already formidable strength. First there is Megingord, a belt of power that doubles his strength when he wears it. Think about that for a moment. Thor is already strong enough to wrestle giants, to lift mountains, to crack the foundations of the world. And when he wears his belt, his strength doubles. The mind struggles to comprehend such power. Bjorn holds up both hands as if wearing invisible gloves. Then there are his iron gloves, called Jarngriper. These he needs to properly grip Mjolnir when he throws it, for the hammer's power is so great that even Thor's bare hands cannot fully contain it. With these gloves, his grip is unbreakable, his throws accurate beyond measure. The old skald settles back in his chair, armed with Mjolnir, wearing Megingjord and Jarngriper. Thor is virtually unstoppable. He is the greatest warrior among the gods, the one they call upon when brute force is needed, when something needs to be broken, or someone needs to be defeated. And most often the enemies Thor faces are the giants of Jotunheim. He speaks the name with a mixture of respect and wariness. The giants, the Jotnar, are ancient enemies of the gods. They are older than the Aesir, descendants of Ymir himself, and they remember a time when they ruled the void unchallenged. Many of them resent the gods for slaying their ancestor and building the worlds from his body. Many of them dream of the day when they will overthrow Asgard and take back what they believe is rightfully theirs. Bjorn's voice takes on a storytelling cadence, and so Thor rides forth regularly into Jotunheim, seeking out giants who threaten the peace, crushing them with Mjolnir, reminding them why they should fear the gods. But there was one adventure, one journey to the realm of giants, that taught Thor a lesson about the limits of even his tremendous power. This is the tale of Thor's visit to Utgard Loki. The fire crackles and the shadows dance on the walls. It began, as many of Thor's adventures do, with the thunder god growing restless in Asgard. Peace is difficult for Thor. He is not built for sitting idle, for feasting without fighting. And so, when he heard tales of a giant stronghold called Utgard, ruled by a giant king named Loki, though not the Loki we know, Thor decided to pay this place a visit. Bjorn holds up a warning finger. Do not confuse this Utgard Loki with Loki the trickster god. The name Loki was common in those days, and this was a giant who happened to share it. Utgard Loki was king of a fortress deep in Jotunheim, renowned for his magic and his cunning. And Thor wished to see for himself whether this king was worthy of his reputation. He continues in his rolling voice. Thor did not travel alone. With him came Loki, the actual Loki, the god of mischief, because Loki could never resist an adventure, especially one that might involve trouble, and they were joined by two servants, a brother and sister named Thjalfi and Roskva, mortals who had entered Thor's service through circumstances too complex to relate now. The old skald pauses to take a drink of mead. Their journey to Utgard was long and strange, filled with wonders and terrors that would take all night to relate. But at last they came to the giant fortress itself, and what a sight it was! The walls rose so high that Thor could not see their tops even when he craned his neck back. The gates were so vast that Thor's entire chariot could have passed through the bars without touching the sides. He spreads his arms wide. They found a way inside, squeezing through a gap in the gate like mice entering a barn, and made their way to the great hall of Utgard Loki. And there sat the giant king on his throne, enormous even by giant standards, looking down at Thor and his companions with a smile that was not quite friendly. Bjorn imitates a deep, booming voice. "Ah! So this is the famous Thor," Utgard Loki said, and his voice shook dust from the rafters. "I must admit, I expected someone larger. You are welcome in my hall, Thunder God, but know that we do not tolerate anyone here who is not skilled in some craft or accomplishment. Tell me, what can you and your companions do?" The old skald's voice returns to normal. Loki, ever quick with his tongue, spoke first. He claimed he could eat faster than anyone. Utgard Loki accepted this challenge and summoned a giant named Loki to compete. They set before Loki and Loki a great trough filled with meat, and at Utgard Loki's signal, both began to eat as fast as they could. Bjorn mimes frantic eating. Loki ate with supernatural speed, faster than any mortal could have managed. He devoured meat after meat, working his way toward the center of the trough. But when he reached the middle and looked up, he found that Loki had not only eaten all his meat, but the bones as well, and the trough too. Loki had lost, though he could not understand how. The children giggle at the image of someone eating a trough. Next, young Thialfi stepped forward. He was the fastest runner in all of Midgard, able to outpace even horses. Utgard Loki set him to race against a young giant named Hugi. 3 times they raced, and 3 times Hugi won so decisively that Thialfi was barely halfway down the track when Hugi finished. Poor Thialfi was humiliated, unable to comprehend how anyone could be so swift. Bjorn's voice grows more serious. And then it was Thor's turn. The thunder god stepped forward, Mjolnir at his belt, determined to restore his party's honor. "What challenge would you set me?" he demanded. "Name anything, and I will prove my worth." The old skald assumes the booming voice again. Utgard Loki stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Can you drink?" he asked. "We have a horn here that any proper drinker should be able to empty in 3 draughts. Most of my servants can manage it in 2. I myself can do it in 1. Bjorn mimes lifting a drinking horn. A drinking horn was brought forth, and Thor took it confidently. He was a god of tremendous appetites, able to drink entire barrels of mead without effect. He raised the horn to his lips and drank deep, gulping without pause until he ran out of breath. But when he looked at the horn, the level of liquid had barely dropped at all. The listeners murmur in surprise. Thor tried again, drinking until his face turned red and his lungs burned for air. This time, the level dropped noticeably, but the horn was still far from empty. On his 3rd attempt, Thor drank until spots swam before his eyes, until his stomach felt ready to burst, and still the horn was not empty. He had to admit defeat, his pride wounded more deeply than any giant's blow had ever managed. The fire pops loudly, and everyone jumps slightly. But Utgard Loki was not finished humiliating his guests. He called forth a great grey cat, larger than a horse, and challenged Thor to lift it off the ground. "Surely the mighty Thor can lift a simple cat," he mocked. Bjorn shakes his head slowly. Thor bent down, wrapped his arms around the cat's belly, and heaved with all his strength. His muscles bulged, his face twisted with effort, but the cat barely arched its back. No matter how hard Thor strained, he could not lift more than one of the cat's paws off the floor. A cat, the mightiest of gods, defeated by a cat. The giants laughed until tears streamed down their faces. Young Eric looks troubled, his image of his hero being shaken. Finally, Thor demanded a real challenge. He would fight anyone in Utgard Loki's hall, he declared, no matter how big or strong. Utgard Loki laughed and said that there was no one in his hall who would lower themselves to wrestle such a weakling, but perhaps his old nurse Ellie would be willing. The old skald pauses for effect. An ancient giantess hobbled forward, bent with age, her skin wrinkled as old leather. Thor almost refused to fight her, finding the whole thing beneath his dignity, but his pride demanded that he prove himself somehow. He grappled with Ellie, expecting to throw her down in an instant. Bjorn's voice drops to a whisper, but he could not. The old woman seemed to grow stronger as they wrestled, firmer in her stance, more impossible to move. Thor strained with all his might, and slowly, impossibly, he found himself being forced down. His knee touched the floor, and Utgard Loki called the match. "Enough," the giant king said. "You have proven that you are not quite as powerful as the legends claim." The hall is silent, the children's faces troubled. Thor was devastated. He had never been so thoroughly defeated, so completely humiliated. He and his companions were given food and beds for the night, but Thor could barely eat or sleep, his mind churning with shame and confusion. Bjorn's voice brightens, but the next morning, as Utgard Loki escorted them out of the fortress, the giant king pulled Thor aside. "We are far enough from my halls now that my magic cannot be overheard," he said, and his voice was different, almost respectful. "I must tell you the truth, Thor. You were never meant to win those contests. They were rigged against you from the start, using illusions more powerful than any you have ever faced." The listeners lean forward, hope rekindling in their eyes. "The giant Logi, who beat Loki at eating. That was not a giant at all. It was fire itself, given form and substance. Nothing can out-eat fire, for fire consumes everything in its path. Yet Loki very nearly kept pace with it, which is a feat beyond telling." Bjorn counts off on his fingers. "The runner Hugi who beat Thialfi. That was thought itself. No mortal can outrun thought. Yet Thialfi ran so fast that Hugi barely kept ahead of him, faster than any living being has ever moved." Another finger. "The drinking horn. Its end was connected to the sea itself. Thor was trying to drain the ocean, and yet he drank so much that the sea level dropped noticeably, creating what mortals call the tides. Every time the tide goes out, that is Thor's drinking being remembered." Eric's face has lit up with wonder. "The cat? That was no cat. It was Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, the creature so vast it encircles the entire world and holds its own tail in its mouth. Thor lifted part of it off the sea floor, a feat that should have been impossible for anyone or anything." Bjorn's voice swells with triumph. "And Ellie, the old nurse, that was old age itself, my friends. Thor wrestled with old age, with the force that defeats all things in the end, and he fell to only one knee. Nothing and no one, not god, nor giant, nor demon, has ever resisted old age so long." The fire blazes up as if in celebration. Utgard Loki looked at Thor with something like fear in his eyes. "You are more powerful than I ever imagined," he admitted. "You frightened us all with your strength. That is why I used illusions, because in a fair contest, nothing in my fortress could have stood against you. Please never return here. I will use every trick at my disposal to keep you out, because if you came in force, nothing could stop you." Bjorn spreads his hands. "And with that, Utgard Loki and his entire fortress vanished, revealed to be nothing but illusion from the start. Thor stood alone on an empty plain, having learned that even the mightiest warrior can be deceived, but also that his strength was greater than even he had known. The old skald settles back with a satisfied smile. Thor returned to Asgard with a new respect for cunning and trickery, though he never developed much skill at them himself. He continued to protect the worlds from giants and monsters, continued to ride forth with Mjolnir in his hand, continued to be the champion of gods and men alike. But he never forgot the lessons of Utgard, never forgot that there are forces in the world that even he cannot overcome through strength alone. A distant rumble of thunder rolls across the sky outside, as if the god himself approves of how his tale has been told. And that, my friends, is one of the many adventures of Thor Odinson. But the night is young yet, and there are more tales to tell. Shall we speak next of another god, one whose name has already come up several times tonight, one whose cleverness rivals Odin's, but whose heart is far less trustworthy? The listeners exchange knowing looks. They know who Bion means. Yes, the old skald says, let us speak of Loki. The mood in the mead hall shifts subtly as Bjorn prepares to speak of Loki. The fire seems to flicker more wildly, casting shadows that dance and twist in ways that almost seem intentional. The ravens in the rafters rustle their feathers and croak softly to one another, as if discussing whether they should stay to hear this part of the tale. Even the wind outside seems to change its tune, howling with a note that sounds almost like laughter. Bjorn Thundervoice takes a long drink from his mead horn, gathering his thoughts. When he speaks, his voice carries a complex mixture of emotions, fascination and wariness, and something that might almost be pity. Loki, he says, and the name hangs in the air like smoke. Loki Laufeyson, the sky treader, the sly one, the father of lies. He is the most complicated figure in all the old tales, my friends, and the hardest to understand. He is not evil, not exactly, not in the simple way that some monsters are evil. He is something more troubling than that. He is chaos itself given form, mischief made flesh, the wild card in the deck of fate. The old skald leans forward in his carved chair. Let me tell you first what Loki looks like, for his appearance tells you much about his nature. He is handsome, perhaps the most handsome of all the gods, with features so fine and regular that they seem almost sculpted. His hair is like fire, red and orange and gold, and it moves even when there is no wind, flickering and dancing as though it has a life of its own. His eyes are green as spring leaves, green as jealousy, green as poison, and they are always watching, always calculating, always looking for the angle that no one else has noticed. Bjorn's voice takes on a note of grudging admiration. He is slim where Thor is broad, quick where Thor is strong, clever where Thor is honest. He moves like smoke, like shadow, like water finding its way through cracks in stone. His tongue is silver, his wit is sharp, and his mind works faster than anyone else's in all the 9 worlds. When Loki walks into a room, everyone notices, whether they want to or not. The fire crackles and a log shifts with a soft thump. But here is the puzzle of Loki, the thing that makes him so difficult to understand. He is not an Aesir by birth. He is not one of Odin's children or kinsmen. He is, in fact, a giant born of giant parents in the frozen wastes of Jotunheim. By all rights, he should be an enemy of the gods, plotting their destruction alongside his kin. Instead, he lives among them, feasts with them, adventures with them, is counted as one of their number. Bjorn holds up a finger. This happened because of a pact made long ago. In the early days of the world, Loki and Odin met under circumstances that the stories do not make entirely clear, and they swore an oath of blood brotherhood. They mingled their blood together, each cutting their palm and clasping hands, becoming brothers in a bond that even gods cannot easily break. From that day forward, Loki had a place in Asgard, a seat at the high table, a voice in the councils of the gods. The old skald shakes his head slowly. Hogwarts, why Odin made this pact, we can only guess. Perhaps he saw something in Loki that he valued. Some spark of genius or some potential that only the Allfather's single eye could perceive. Perhaps he knew that the gods would need Loki's cunning someday, would need someone who could think in ways that honest minds cannot. Or perhaps it was simply one of those decisions that seemed wise at the time, but would bear bitter fruit in years to come. A child raises her hand tentatively. "Is Loki bad?" she asks in a small voice. Bjorn considers the question seriously before answering. That, little one, is the hardest question anyone can ask about Loki. He has done terrible things, things that brought grief and suffering to the gods and to the worlds, but he has also done wonderful things, things that saved the gods when nothing else could. He is like fire itself, which can warm your home and cook your food, but can also burn your village to the ground. Fire is not good or bad. Fire simply is what it is. And Loki, I think, is much the same. He settles back and continues his tale. Let me tell you of some of Loki's deeds, and you can judge for yourself what he is. We shall start with a story that shows both his worst and his best. The tale of Sif's golden hair. The listeners lean in, recognizing the beginning of a favorite tale. Sif, as you may know, is Thor's wife, a goddess of the harvest and fertility. She is beautiful in the way that summer fields are beautiful, golden and warm and full of life. And her most glorious feature was her hair, long locks of purest gold that flow down her back like a river of sunlight. It was said that when Sif walked through the fields, the grain bowed to her in recognition of their kinship. Bjorn's voice darkens. One night, while Thor was away from home battling giants in the east, Loki crept into Sif's chambers while she slept. Whether he did it out of malice or boredom or some twisted sense of humor, no one knows for certain. But when Sif awoke the next morning, her beautiful golden hair was gone, sheared off close to her scalp, leaving her nearly bald. Several of the women in the hall gasped and touched their own hair instinctively. Sif wept and screamed and hid herself away in shame. And when Thor returned home and discovered what had happened, his rage was terrible to behold. The sky turned black with storm clouds. Lightning struck the mountains until they cracked and crumbled. Thunder rolled across the 9 worlds so loud that giants in Jotunheim trembled in their halls. The old skald's voice drops to something almost like a whisper. Thor found Loki hiding in one of the far corners of Asgard and seized him by the throat. He lifted the trickster off his feet. Mjolnir raised and ready to crush Loki's skull. Loki dangled there, choking, knowing that his death was moments away. A tense silence fills the hall, but Loki was not called the Silver Tongue for nothing. Even with Thor's massive hand cutting off his air, he managed to gasp out a promise. "Wait," he wheezed, "I can fix this. I can make Sif new hair, better hair of real gold that will grow like natural hair. Give me a chance and I will make things right." Bjorn chuckles softly. Thor hesitated. His love for Sif warred with his desire to crush Loki like a bug, but in the end, his love won out. He released Loki and gave him 3 days to make good on his promise. If he failed, Thor swore not even Odin's blood oath would save him from Mjolnir's judgment. The fire blazes up cheerfully as the story takes a lighter turn. Loki fled Asgard and made his way down through the roots of Yggdrasil to Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves. The dwarves, as you know, are the greatest craftsmen in all the 9 worlds, capable of forging wonders that even the gods cannot make. If anyone could create magical golden hair, it would be the dwarves. Bjorn gestures as if holding something delicate. Loki found 2 dwarven brothers, the sons of Ivaldi, and he explained his need. The dwarves agreed to help, partly because they loved a challenge, and partly because Loki promised them great rewards. They set to work in their forge, and when they were done, they had created not just golden hair for Sif, but 2 other treasures as well. He counts on his fingers. First, the golden hair itself, spun from real gold but lighter than feathers, which would attach to Sif's head and grow, just as natural hair grows. Second, a magical spear called Gungnir, which would never miss its target when thrown, destined to become Odin's own weapon. Third, a ship called Skidbladnir, large enough to carry all the gods but able to fold up small enough to fit in a pocket. The children's eyes grow wide at the thought of such wonders. Now, a wise person would have taken these treasures and returned to Asgard, content to have saved his life and made amends for his mischief. But Loki, being Loki, could not resist the opportunity for more trouble. He found another pair of dwarven smiths, brothers named Brock and Sindri, and he made a wager with them. Bjorn's voice takes on an amused tone. "I have just received 3 treasures from the sons of Ivaldi," Loki told them. "I bet my own head that you cannot make 3 treasures to equal them." Several listeners groan, recognizing the folly of such a bet. Brock and Sindri accepted the wager eagerly, for their pride in their craft was enormous. They stoked their forge to blazing heat and began to work, and Loki, realizing that he might actually lose this bet and thus his head, decided to sabotage their efforts. The old skald shakes his head in disapproval. That is not entirely genuine. As Sindri worked the bellows, keeping the fire at exactly the right temperature, Loki transformed himself into a fly and bit Brock on the hand. But Brock did not stop pumping the bellows. When the first treasure was done, it was a golden boar called Gullinbasti, whose bristles glowed in the dark and who could run faster than any horse. Bjorn continues, warming to the tale. For the second treasure, Loki the fly bit Brock on the neck, harder than before. But still Brok did not stop pumping. The second treasure was a golden ring called Draupnir, which would drip 8 identical golden rings from itself every 9th night, an endless source of wealth. He leans forward. For the third treasure, Loki knew he had to make Brok stop pumping. He bit the dwarf on the eyelid so hard that blood flowed down into his eye. For just a moment Brok faltered, wiping the blood away. And when the third treasure was pulled from the forge, it was Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor, perfect in every way except that its handle was slightly too short. The listeners murmur with recognition. That is why Mjolnir's handle is short, my friends, because Loki, in fly form, bit a dwarf's eyelid at exactly the wrong moment. Even so, the hammer was judged the greatest treasure of all, and Loki had lost his bet. A child gasps. Did they cut off his head? Bjorn grins wickedly. They tried. But Loki, ever clever, pointed out that he had wagered his head, not his neck. And since it was impossible to take his head without cutting his neck, which he had not wagered, the dwarves could not collect their prize. They were furious, of course, and they demanded some compensation for the insult. So they sewed Loki's lips shut with leather cord, which kept him silent for a merciful while. Laughter ripples through the hall. And so from Loki's mischief came some of the greatest treasures of the gods. Sif received her golden hair, which was even more beautiful than her original locks. Odin received Gungnir, the spear that never misses. Thor received Mjolnir, the hammer that has saved the worlds countless times. The gods received Skidbladnir, Gullinbursti, and Draupnir, all because Loki cut a woman's hair and then gambled his head to make amends. The old skald spreads his hands. This is Loki in miniature. He causes problems, then solves them, usually creating even more chaos in the process. He brings gifts with one hand and takes things away with the other. He is invaluable and insufferable, beloved and hated, essential and dangerous. Bjorn's voice grows more serious. But I must tell you of Loki's children, for they are important to understanding his nature and the fate that awaits the worlds. Loki has had many partners over the years, some willing and some less so, and his offspring are as strange and varied as he is. The fire dims slightly, as if in anticipation of darker matters. His wife in Asgard is Sigyn, a goddess of loyalty and devotion, and by her he has 2 sons, Nafi and Vali. These are ordinary enough as the children of gods go. But Loki also had 3 children by a giantess named Angerboda, whose name means bringer of grief. And these 3 children are anything but ordinary. Bjorn's voice drops to a near whisper. The first is Fenrir, the great wolf, a beast of such size and ferocity that even the gods fear him. When Fenrir was young, the gods brought him to Asgard, thinking to raise him among them and perhaps tame his savage nature. But Fenrir grew and grew, larger than horses, larger than houses, larger than anything living should be. His hunger was insatiable, his rage barely contained, and the gods realized too late what they had taken into their home. The children huddle closer to their parents. The second child is Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. That same creature Thor tried to lift in Utgard Loki's hall. Odin cast Jormungandr into the sea when it was young, hoping to be rid of it. But the serpent did not die. It grew and grew in the ocean depths until it encircled the entire world, its body wrapped around Midgard, its tail held in its own mouth. There it waits, patient and terrible, for the day when it will release its tail and rise to destroy everything. A log shifts in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. The third child is Hel, a daughter, who is perhaps the strangest of all. She appears as a woman, but only half of her is alive and fair to look upon. The other half is dead and rotting, corpse flesh and exposed bone, decay given form. Odin gave her dominion over Niflheim and the souls of those who die of illness or old age, and there she rules in her cold halls surrounded by the countless dead. Bjorn pauses, letting the weight of these images settle over his listeners. The gods looked upon Loki's monstrous children, and they were afraid. Prophecy spoke of these three playing crucial roles in the destruction of the worlds in the final battle called Ragnarok. And so the gods took action, binding Fenrir with magical chains, casting Jormungandr into the sea, giving Hel her own realm far from Asgard. The old skald's voice softens. But chains can break. The sea cannot hold its monsters forever, and Hel's realm grows more populous with each passing year. The children of Loki wait, patient as stone, eternal as the stars, for the day when they will be free to fulfill their destinies. He shifts in his chair, his old bones creaking. Loki himself grew darker as the years passed. His tricks became crueler, his lies more harmful, his resentment of the other gods more obvious. Perhaps it was the treatment of his children that turned him. Perhaps it was something in his nature that could not be forever suppressed. Perhaps it was simply inevitable, the way fire must eventually burn what it has been warming. Bjorn looks around the hall at his listeners, his ice-blue eyes reflecting the firelight. The gods tolerated Loki's mischief for a long time, for he was still useful to them, still clever, still occasionally helpful. But there would come a day when Loki went too far, when he did something so terrible that even his blood bond with Odin could not protect him. There would come a day when Loki killed the most beloved of all the gods. The hall falls utterly silent. But that, Bjorn says softly, is a tale for the next part of our story. For now, let us remember Loki as he was in his better days, a figure of chaos and creativity, of destruction and solution, a fire that warmed as often as it burned. And let us remember that even the worst among us were not always so, that even the brightest can fall into darkness. He reaches for his mead horn, his face thoughtful and sad. Now, shall we speak of Baldur? Shall we speak of the best and brightest of all the gods, and of how Loki brought about his death? The listeners nod solemnly, knowing that the tale is about to take a darker turn. The fire in the mead hall has burned down to glowing coals, casting a softer, redder light across the assembled listeners. Someone rises quietly to add more wood, and the fresh logs catch slowly, sending up tendrils of smoke before bursting into cheerful flame. But the mood in the hall is not cheerful. The children sense that something sad is coming, and even the adults have grown quieter, more contemplative, as Bjorn prepares to tell what may be the most tragic tale in all of Norse mythology. The old skald takes his time, sipping his mead, letting the anticipation build. When he finally speaks, his voice is gentler than before, touched with genuine sorrow that not even centuries of retelling have diminished. "Baldur," he says, and the name seems to glow in the air like the god himself. Baldur Odinson, called the Beautiful, called the Shining One, called the best and brightest of all who dwell in Asgard. If there was ever a god who deserved to be loved, it was Baldur. If there was ever a death that should not have happened, it was his. Bjorn gazes into the fire as he speaks. Imagine, if you can, a being of such radiant goodness that simply being in his presence made you feel better about the world. Baldur was like the first warm day of spring after a long winter, like the taste of honey on your tongue, like the laughter of children playing in meadows of wild flowers. His hair was golden as summer wheat, his eyes blue as the sky at noon, his smile like sunlight breaking through clouds. The old skald's voice carries a note of longing. But Baldur was not merely beautiful to look upon. He was beautiful in his soul, in his heart, in every word he spoke and every deed he did. He was kind to everyone, from the highest gods to the lowest servants. He never spoke harshly, never acted cruelly, never harbored jealousy or resentment. When disputes arose among the gods, Baldur was the peacemaker, the voice of reason, the one who could find common ground where others saw only conflict. A mother in the audience pulls her child closer, sensing what is to come. All the gods loved Baldur, all of them without exception, for to know him was to love him. Even Loki, in his way, cared for the shining god, though perhaps that caring was twisted by jealousy into something darker. The goddesses wept when Baldur was sad, and laughed when he was joyful. The warriors of Valhalla fell silent when he passed, awed by his presence. Even the animals and plants of the 9 worlds seemed to recognize his special nature, bowing their heads or turning their faces toward him as flowers turn toward the sun. Bjorn's voice grows heavier, but then something changed. Baldur began to have dreams, dark dreams, dreams of his own death, night after night. He would wake in terror, having seen visions of himself lying cold and still, the light gone from his eyes. He tried to ignore them at first, for even gods can have nightmares. But the dreams persisted, growing more vivid, more detailed, more inevitable with each passing night. The fire crackles and a log settles with a soft thump. Baldur told his mother Frigg about these dreams, and she was filled with dread. Frigg is a goddess of great wisdom and foresight, and she knew that dreams of this sort were not mere fancy. They were prophecy, glimpses of a future that was rushing toward them like a river in flood. Something was going to try to kill her son, and Frigg was determined to prevent it. Bjorn leans forward in his chair. So Frigg set out on a great journey across all the 9 worlds, visiting every creature and every substance that existed. She went to the mountains and asked the stones to swear an oath never to harm Baldur. She went to the forest and asked the trees to make the same promise. She asked the metals and the waters, the fires and the winds, the animals and the plants, the diseases and the poisons. Everything she found she extracted an oath from, a binding promise never to hurt her beloved son. His voice takes on a note of wonder. And they all agreed. How could they not? Everyone loved Baldur, even the stones, even the flames, even death itself. One by one, everything in existence swore to protect him, to refuse to cause him harm no matter the circumstances. By the time Frigg returned to Asgard, she believed her son was safe. Nothing in all the 9 worlds could hurt him now. A child tugs at her father's sleeve. But something did hurt him, didn't it? Bjorn nods sadly. Yes, little one, something did. But first, let me tell you what the gods did with Baldur's newfound invulnerability, for even tragedy has moments of joy within it. His voice lightens slightly. The gods, being gods, decided to test Frigg's work. They gathered in a great circle around Baldur and began throwing things at him. Stones, spears, arrows, axes, anything they could find. And Baldur just stood there, laughing, as every missile bounced off him harmlessly. The stones fell away like pebbles. The spears glanced off, as if striking the hardest armor. The arrows tumbled to the ground without leaving a mark. Bjorn almost smiles. It became a game, a celebration of Baldur's safety. The gods would gather each day and hurl their most fearsome weapons at the shining god, and each day he would emerge without a scratch. They threw Thor's lightning bolts. They threw Odin's spear Gungnir. They threw fire and ice and all manner of magical attacks. Nothing worked. Baldur was truly invulnerable, protected by the oaths of everything that existed. The old skald's voice hardens. Everyone joined in this game. Everyone except Loki. The trickster god watched from the shadows, his green eyes narrow with thought. He did not celebrate Baldur's safety. Instead, he wondered. He questioned. He searched for the flaw that he knew must exist, because nothing is ever truly perfect, and no protection is ever truly complete. The fire seems to dim slightly as Bjorn continues. Loki went to Frigg in disguise, wearing the face of an old woman, a harmless crone who meant no threat. He found the goddess weaving at her loom, content in the belief that her son was safe. And in his false voice, Loki asked her, "Is it true that everything has sworn not to harm Baldur? Everything in all the worlds?" Bjorn shakes his head slowly. Frigg, unsuspecting, answered freely. "Yes," she said, "everything has sworn the oath. The stones and the metals, the fires and the waters, the beasts and the plants, all have promised not to hurt my son." Then she paused, and in that pause Loki's heart quickened. "Well," she admitted, "there was one small thing I did not ask. A little plant called mistletoe, growing on the oak tree west of Valhalla. It seemed so young and weak that I thought it harmless. Not worth the trouble of extracting an oath." The hall is utterly silent. Loki thanked the old woman, the disguise hiding his terrible smile, and he slipped away to find the mistletoe. He found it growing just where Frigg had said, a small green plant with white berries clinging to the bark of a mighty oak. It was indeed small and weak, its stems soft enough to bend with a breath of wind. But in Loki's cunning hands, even weak things can become weapons. Bjorn's voice is barely above a whisper now. He fashioned the mistletoe into a dart, a small, sharp projectile that seemed too fragile to harm anything. Then he returned to Asgard, where the gods were still playing their game, still hurling weapons at laughing Baldur, still celebrating his invulnerability. and Loki found the one god who was not participating in the game. He pauses for a heavy moment. Hodur was Baldur's brother, but where Baldur was light, Hodur was darkness. Where Baldur could see all the beauty in the world, Hodur could see nothing at all, for he had been born blind. He stood apart from the other gods, listening to their laughter, unable to join in their game, because he could not see where to aim. A child makes a soft sound of sympathy. Loki approached Hodur with a friendly voice, all concern and helpfulness. "Brother Hodur," he said, "why do you not join the fun? Why do you not honor Baldur by throwing something at him like the others?" Bjorn takes on Hodor's voice, sad and resigned. Hodur replied, "How can I? I cannot see where to throw. And besides, I have nothing to throw. I am useless in such games." The old skald continues in Loki's smooth, treacherous tones. "I will help you," Loki said. "Here, take this small dart I have found. It is nothing really, just a twig, but it will show your love for your brother. I will guide your hand, aim for you, and you can participate like everyone else." Bjorn's voice breaks slightly. Hodur, trusting, grateful for his inclusion, took the mistletoe dart from Loki's hand. He felt it, so light, so seemingly harmless, and with Loki guiding his arm, pointing it toward his brother's voice, toward Baldur's laughter, Hodur threw. The fire crackles sharply, and several listeners jump. The mistletoe flew straight and true, guided by Loki's malice, finding its target with unerring accuracy. It struck Baldur in the chest, and the shining god stopped laughing. He looked down at the small dart protruding from his heart, his beautiful face showing only confusion, not understanding what had happened. Then the light went out of his eyes, and Baldur fell. A woman in the audience begins to weep quietly. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The gods could not comprehend what they were seeing. Baldur, invulnerable Baldur, beloved Baldur, lay dead on the ground, killed by a twig, killed by a blind man's throw, killed by Loki's treachery. Then the silence broke, and the screaming began. Bjorn's voice is rough with emotion. The wailing of the gods could be heard across all the 9 worlds. In Midgard, humans looked up at the sky and shuddered, not knowing why they suddenly felt such grief. In Jotunheim, even the giants paused in their eternal hatred to acknowledge that something terrible had happened. The sun itself seemed to dim. The birds stopped singing. The flowers bowed their heads. Baldur the Beautiful was dead, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The old skald pauses to compose himself. Frigg was inconsolable. Her protection had failed because of one small oversight, one tiny plant she had thought too weak to matter. But even in her grief, she was not ready to accept her son's death. She asked the gods if any of them would ride to Helheim, to the realm of the dead, to bargain with Hel herself for Baldur's return. Bjorn's voice strengthens. Hermod stepped forward, another son of Odin, brave and loyal. He volunteered to make the terrible journey, to ride down through the dark passages to the land of the dead, to plead for his brother's life. Odin gave him Sleipnir, the 8-legged horse, the fastest mount in existence, and Hermod set off on his desperate mission. The fire blazes up as if responding to the hope in the tale. For 9 nights, Hermod rode through darkness so complete that he could not see Sleipnir's ears in front of him. He crossed rivers of knives and mountains of ice and valleys where the dead wandered, lost and moaning. At last, he came to the gates of Helheim, gates so high they scraped the sky itself. Without hesitation, he urged Sleipnir forward, and the magical horse leaped over the gates as easily as a sparrow clears a fence. Bjorn's voice carries a thread of hope. Inside, Hermod found Hel's great hall, cold and grey and filled with the pale shades of the countless dead. And there, seated at the high table as an honored guest, was Baldur himself, still beautiful even in death, still radiant though his light was dimmed. Beside Hel he sat, and Hel herself regarded Hermod with her mismatched eyes, one alive and one dead. The old skald takes on a cold, measured voice. Hermod pleaded for his brother's life. He told Hel of the grief that had overtaken all the worlds, of the weeping and wailing of the darkness that had fallen since Baldur's death. He begged her to release his brother, to let him return to the living. Bjorn pauses. Hel considered his words for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was like the closing of a coffin lid. "If it is true that all the worlds weep for Baldur," she said, "then I will release him. Let every creature and everything in existence shed tears for the dead god. If every eye weeps, if every substance grieves, then Baldur may return to life. But if even one being refuses to cry, if even one thing holds back its tears, then Baldur stays with me forever." Hope flickered in the hall, for surely everything would weep for Baldur. Hermod raced back to Asgard with Hel's conditions, and the gods sent messengers across all the 9 worlds. "Weep for Baldur," they cried. "Weep and he will return to us," and the worlds responded. Humans wept until their eyes were raw. Giants wept despite their hatred of the gods. Animals wept. Stones wept, metals wept, even the fire and the ice shed tears of grief. It seemed that Hel's condition would be met, that Baldur would return. Bjorn's voice drops to something cold and bitter. But in a cave in the far reaches of the worlds, the messengers found one being who would not weep. An old giantess named Thok sat dry-eyed, unmoved by their pleas. "Let Hel keep what she has," Thok said. "I cared nothing for Baldur alive, and I cared nothing for him dead. Let the old one keep her prize." The fire seems to dim. And so, because of one dry-eyed giantess, Baldur remained dead. He would not return until the end of all things, until after Ragnarok, when a new world would rise from the ashes of the old. The gods raged and wept anew, cursing Thok, searching for her, but she had vanished. Bjorn's voice is heavy with ancient anger. They never found Thok, but they discovered the truth eventually. The giantess had been no giantess at all. She had been Loki in yet another disguise. Loki who had killed Baldur and now ensured he could not return. Loki who had finally gone too far for even his blood bond with Odin to protect him. The old skald sits back, exhaustion and sorrow evident on his weathered face. The gods captured Loki at last. They dragged him to a cave deep beneath the earth, and there they bound him with chains made from the entrails of his own son Nafi, whom they had killed for this purpose. They hung a serpent above his head, a serpent whose venom dripped constantly down onto his face, burning him with agony beyond description. His faithful wife Sigyn stands beside him still, holding a bowl to catch the poison. But when the bowl fills and she must turn away to empty it, the venom falls on Loki's face, and his screams of pain cause the earth itself to shake. Bjorn looks around at his listeners. That is where Loki remains to this day, bound and suffering, waiting for the day when his bonds will break, waiting for Ragnarok, waiting to lead the forces of chaos against the gods who punished him. And Baldur waits too, in Hell's cold halls, waits for the end and the new beginning that will follow. He reaches for his mead horn with a hand that trembles slightly. And that, my friends, is the tale of Baldur the Beautiful, the brightest light, extinguished by jealousy and treachery. The most beloved god lost because of a mother's small oversight and a trickster's enormous malice. It is a sad tale, perhaps the saddest of all our tales, but it reminds us that nothing good lasts forever, that even the gods must face loss and grief. A child sniffles quietly, and her mother strokes her hair. But remember, Bjorn adds, his voice warming slightly, that Baldur will return. After the fire and the flood, after the death of gods and the destruction of worlds, a new earth will rise, green and beautiful, and Baldur will walk upon it, shining as brightly as ever. Death is not the end for those who are loved. Death is only a long sleep, from which even gods may one day wake. The fire blazes up again, as if agreeing with his words, and the warmth of it seems to push back the sorrow that has filled the hall. Now, Bjorn says, let us speak of lighter things for a moment. Let us speak of the Valkyries, those fierce and beautiful maidens who serve Odin, who carry fallen warriors to Valhalla, who embody the glory and honor that the Norse hold so dear. The mood in the mead hall shifts again, lightening despite the lingering sadness of Baldur's tale. The fire burns strong and bright. The mead flows freely, and Bjorn Thundervoice straightens in his carved chair with renewed energy. Outside, the storm has begun to quiet somewhat, the wind's howl diminishing to a softer moan, as if even the weather knows that the darkest parts of the night's tales are past. The Valkyries, Bjorn says, and his voice carries a note of reverence mixed with something that might be longing. The choosers of the slain, the warrior maidens, the daughters of Odin. They are among the most glorious and most feared beings in all the 9 worlds. He looks around at his audience, noting the young men who sit up straighter at the mention of the Valkyries, the young women whose eyes shine with interest and perhaps a touch of envy. Picture them if you can. They ride across the sky on horses that gallop upon the clouds themselves, their hooves striking thunder from the heavens. Their armor gleams like polished silver, their spears shine like captured lightning, their shields reflect the light of stars. They are beautiful, yes, beautiful beyond mortal imagining, but theirs is the beauty of a perfectly balanced blade, deadly and precise and utterly without softness. The old skald's voice takes on a rhythmic quality. Their hair streams behind them like banners of war, gold and red and black and brown. Their eyes see everything, missing no detail of the battles that rage below. They watch from the skies as mortals fight and struggle and die, and they judge. They evaluate every warrior, weighing courage against fear, skill against luck, honor against desperation. Bjorn raises a hand as if selecting from an invisible crowd. When a warrior falls in battle, truly falls with no hope of rising again, the Valkyries descend. They come like eagles diving upon prey, swift and certain. But they do not come to destroy. They come to choose. They look upon the dying warrior and they decide, is this one worthy? Has this one earned the right to feast in Odin's hall? A young man near the fire leans forward eagerly. Ah, if the answer is yes, if the warrior has fought with sufficient courage and honor, then the Valkyrie takes his soul upon her horse and carries him up through the sky, through the rainbow bridge of Bifrost to the golden halls of Valhalla. There he will live forever, fighting and feasting, preparing for the final battle when Odin will need every sword. Bjorn's voice softens. But not all who die bravely go to Valhalla. The Valkyries take half of the honored dead to Odin's hall, but the other half go elsewhere. They go to Folkvanger, which means the field of the host, and there they are welcomed by Freya, the goddess of love and beauty and war. Yes, war, for Freya is not the gentle creature some imagine. She is fierce and proud, a goddess who chooses her warriors with as much care as Odin himself. The old skald looks toward a group of young women in the audience. Freya rides to battle in a chariot pulled by two great cats, fearsome beasts with claws like swords and teeth like daggers. She wears the Brisingamen, a necklace of such beauty that all who see it are dazzled. And her hall in Folkvanger is as splendid as Valhalla itself, filled with music and laughter and the joy of warriors who have earned their rest. He settles back in his chair. Some say the Valkyries decide which warriors go to Odin and which to Freya. Others say the choice is made by the souls themselves, drawn to one hall or the other by their own natures. Still others say that Odin and Freya agreed long ago to share the honored dead, alternating their choices like players in a game. Whatever the truth, both halls are filled with heroes, and both await the coming of Ragnarok. A child raises her hand. What about people who don't die in battle? What happens to them? Bjorn nods approvingly at the question. Ah, a wise question, little one. The warriors who die bravely are only a small portion of all who die. Most people pass from this world through illness or old age or accident, and for them a different fate awaits. They go to Helheim, to the realm of the goddess Hel, where Baldur now waits for the end of days. His voice is gentle, not frightening. Helheim is not a place of punishment, not for most souls. It is simply a place of rest, a grey and quiet land where the dead exist without pain or pleasure, without hunger or satisfaction. It is neither heaven nor hell as some other faiths describe them. It is merely the end, the final stop on the journey of life. The fire crackles softly, but let us speak of heroes, of the great warriors whose deeds are remembered in song and story, whose names have echoed down through the ages. For the tales of the gods are only half of our heritage. The other half belongs to mortal men and women who rose above their nature who achieved greatness against impossible odds, who earned their places in the halls of the honored dead. Bjorn's voice takes on an epic quality. There are many heroes I could tell you of, but tonight let me speak of Sigurd, called the Dragon Slayer, perhaps the greatest mortal hero who ever lived. His tale has everything: magic and treasure, love and betrayal, triumph and tragedy. It is a story that the skalds have sung since the earliest days, and one that still has the power to move the hardest heart. The listeners settle in, recognizing the beginning of a beloved tale. Sigurd was born of noble blood, descended from Odin himself through many generations. But his birth was touched by tragedy, for his father was killed before he could see his son's face betrayed by those who coveted his kingdom. Sigurd's mother fled with her infant, and the boy was raised in secret, ignorant of his true heritage. Bjorn gestures as if describing distant landscapes. He grew up in the hall of a dwarf named Regan, who recognized the potential in the young man and trained him in the arts of war and wisdom. Regan taught Sigurd to fight with sword and spear, to ride horses, to understand the ways of the world, but Regan had his own motives, for the dwarf harbored a secret that had burned in his heart for many long years. The old skald's voice drops conspiratorially. Regan had a brother named Fafnir, and once, long ago, the two of them had committed a terrible crime. They had murdered their own father for his treasure, a hoard of gold beyond imagining. But Fafnir, the stronger of the two, had taken all the treasure for himself and driven Regan away. Worse, the gold was cursed, and the curse transformed Fafnir over the long years into a dragon. Several children gasped with delighted fear. Yes, a dragon. A great serpent of scales and fire, longer than a longship, with teeth like swords and breath like a furnace. Fafnir now lay coiled around his treasure in a cave in the wastelands, killing any who approached, guarding his gold with mindless, endless greed. And Regan wanted that treasure, wanted it with an obsession that had consumed his entire life. Bjorn continues in measured tones. Regan saw in Sigurd the instrument of his revenge. He forged for the young hero a sword of surpassing quality, a blade called Gram that could cut through iron and stone as easily as through air. He told Sigurd of the dragon, of the treasure, of the glory that awaited whoever could slay such a beast. And Sigurd, young and eager for adventure, agreed to try. The fire blazes up dramatically. The battle with Fafnir is one of the greatest deeds in all of heroic legend. Sigurd could not face the dragon directly, for even with Gram in his hand, he could not withstand the creature's fire or the crushing weight of its coils. So he used cunning instead. He dug a pit in the path that Fafnir used to crawl to a nearby stream, and he hid himself within it, his sword pointing upward. Bjorn mimes thrusting upward with an invisible blade. When Fafnir crawled over the pit, his soft belly exposed for the first time in centuries, Sigurd struck. He drove Gram up through the dragon's chest, piercing its heart, and Fafnir fell with a roar that shook the mountains. The dragon was dying, but it was not yet dead, and in its final moments it spoke to Sigurd. The old skald's voice becomes deep and rumbling. Fafnir warned the young hero about Regan, "The dwarf means to betray you," the dragon gasped. "He will kill you and take the treasure for himself. And beware the gold, boy. It is cursed. Everyone who possesses it comes to a bad end. I was once like you, young and proud and fearless. Look at what the gold made of me." Bjorn's voice returns to normal. Sigurd listened, and he remembered. When Regan approached him after the dragon's death, intent on some treachery that Sigurd could sense but not see, the hero struck first. He killed the dwarf with a single blow of Gram, ending Regan's schemes before they could bear fruit. And then Sigurd did something that would change his fate forever. The fire crackles with anticipation. As Sigurd roasted the dragon's heart over a fire, meaning to eat it and gain the creature's wisdom, he burned his thumb on the hot meat. Without a thinking, he put his thumb in his mouth to cool the burn, and the dragon's blood touched his tongue. Instantly, his ears opened to sounds he had never heard before. He could understand the speech of birds. A child claps her hands with delight at this detail. The birds in the trees nearby were talking about him, about the cursed treasure, about the beautiful woman who slept surrounded by fire on a mountain top not far away. Sigurd listened, fascinated, and what he heard changed the course of his life. There was a Valkyrie, the birds said, named Brynhilda, who had disobeyed Odin and been punished with an enchanted sleep, surrounded by flames that only the bravest hero could pass. Bjorn's voice softens with romance. Sigurd loaded the cursed treasure onto his horse and rode towards the mountain the birds had described. He found it wrapped in fire, flames that leaped higher than trees, that burned with such intensity that even the rocks glowed red. But Sigurd did not hesitate. He rode his horse straight into the fire, and because his courage was pure, the flames parted before him like water before a ship's prow. The mead hall seems to grow warmer as Bjorn describes the flames. On the mountain top, he found a figure lying on a stone bier, armored in silver, seemingly dead but somehow not. He removed the helmet and saw the most beautiful face he had ever beheld, a woman warrior of such radiance that his heart stopped in his chest. This was Brynhilda, greatest of the Valkyries, reduced now to mortal form as punishment for her defiance. The old skald's voice carries the weight of love and tragedy intertwined. Sigurd kissed her, and she woke. Their eyes met, and in that moment, both knew they were meant for each other. They pledged their love, exchanged rings, swore oaths that they believed would bind them forever. It was perfect, pure, the kind of love that makes the gods themselves envious. His voice darkens. But remember the cursed gold. Remember Fafnir's warning. The treasure that Sigurd carried would bring doom to everyone it touched. And though Sigurd and Brynhilda loved each other truly, forces were already in motion that would tear them apart. Bjorn sighs heavily. The full tale of their tragedy is too long and too sad to tell tonight. There were potions of forgetfulness, forced marriages, betrayals, real and imagined, jealousy and rage and honor twisted beyond recognition. In the end, Brynhilda brought about Sigurd's death, tricked into believing he had wronged her, and when she learned the truth, she threw herself upon his funeral pyre dying in the same flames that had once surrounded her. A woman in the audience wipes tears from her eyes. They found each other again, in death it is said. They ride together now, in the halls of the honored dead, their love restored, their tragedies washed away by time and forgiveness. The cursed gold passed to others, destroying them in turn, until at last it sank beneath the waters of the Rhine, where perhaps it waits still for some fool to claim it. The old skald lets the silence stretch for a long moment. Why do I tell you this tale on a night devoted to the gods and their myths? Because Sigurd's story teaches us what it means to be a hero in the Norse tradition. It is not about winning. It is not about surviving. It is about how you face the challenges that fate puts before you. It is about courage and honor, and doing what is right even when the cost is everything you have. Bjorn looks around the hall at his listeners. Sigurd knew the gold was cursed. He knew that carrying it would lead to his doom, but he did not throw it away, did not flee from his fate. He walked forward into his destiny with his eyes open, meeting each challenge as it came, fighting and loving and living fully until the very end. That is what it means to be a hero. Not to avoid suffering, but to face it with courage. He raises his mead horn. To Sigurd then, to Brynhilde, to all the heroes who have gone before us and shown us how to live and how to die. May we be worthy of their example. May we meet our own fates with the same courage they showed. And may we find each other again in the halls of the honored dead when our own stories have come to their ends. The listeners raise their own cups in response. A quiet toast to the heroes of old. Now, Bjorn says, lowering his horn, the night grows late, but there is more yet to tell. We have spoken of the gods and their domains, of heroes and their deeds, but we have not yet spoken of the other beings who share the 9 worlds with us. We have not spoken of the giants and the dwarves, the elves and the Norns, the creatures who fill the spaces between the great powers. He settles back in his chair. Let us speak now of these beings, for to understand the cosmos, we must understand all who dwell within it. The gods are not alone in Yggdrasil's branches. They share their home with countless others, some friendly, some hostile, some merely strange beyond mortal comprehension. The fire burns steadily as Bjorn prepares to continue his tale, and the listeners settle in for more wonders and revelations. The fire in the mead hall has settled into a steady, comfortable blaze, the kind of fire that seems almost alive in its constancy. The storm outside has diminished to a gentle whisper of wind and the soft patter of snow against the walls, as if even the weather has grown tired and ready for rest. But inside Bjornstead the listeners remain alert, their attention fixed on old Bjorn Thundervoice, as he guides them through the wonders of the 9 worlds. The old skald takes a moment to stretch his aged limbs, his joints popping softly in the warm air. He reaches for a piece of bread from the basket that someone has placed beside his chair, and tears off a small piece, chewing thoughtfully before continuing his tale. "We have spoken much of the gods tonight," he says, brushing crumbs from his beard, "of Odin and Thor, of Loki and Baldur, of the Valkyries and the heroes they choose. But the 9 worlds are vast, my friends, and they are filled with beings far stranger and more varied than the Aesir alone. Let us now turn our attention to these others, to the creatures who share Yggdrasil's branches with the gods. He settles back in his chair, his ice-blue eyes distant with memory. We shall begin with the giants, the Jotnar, for they are the oldest enemies of the gods and perhaps the most misunderstood. When I say giant, you probably picture a creature like a man, but larger, taller than trees, able to crush villages with a single step. And some giants are indeed like this. But the Jotnar are far more varied than such simple images suggest. Bjorn spreads his hands wide. Remember that the giants are descended from Ymir, the first being who was himself born from the meeting of ice and fire. The giants carry that primordial nature within them. Some are beings of pure frost, their bodies made of ice and snow, their breath cold enough to freeze rivers solid. These are the frost giants, the Hrimthursar, and they dwell in the frozen wastes of Jotunheim, in halls carved from glaciers, in valleys where the sun never shines. The fire seems to burn a little brighter, as if pushing back against the cold Bjorn describes. Other giants are beings of fire and smoke, kin to the flames of Muspelheim, their skin glowing like coals, their eyes burning like stars. Still, others are giants of the mountains, their bodies made of stone and earth, patient and slow-moving, but possessed of strength beyond imagining. And some giants look almost human, beautiful or terrible depending on their nature, indistinguishable from gods until you look into their eyes and see the ancient chaos that lurks within. A child tugs at his mother's sleeve and whispers something. The mother nods and raises her voice. My son wants to know if all giants are evil. Bjorn chuckles warmly. Ah, an excellent question, young one, and the answer is no. Not all giants are evil. The giants as a race resent the gods, it is true. They remember that Odin and his brothers slew their ancestor Ymir and built the worlds from his corpse. They remember the many battles, the many insults, the many times Thor has ridden into Jotunheim and slain their kin. There is bad blood between gods and giants that goes back to the very beginning of time. He holds up a cautioning finger, but individuals are not their race. There are giants who have befriended the gods, who have married them, who have fought alongside them against common enemies. Odin's own mother, Besla, was a giantess, remember? Thor's great enemy, Jormungandr, is also his kin through Loki. The lines between god and giant are not as clear as the old stories sometimes make them seem. Bjorn's voice takes on a storytelling cadence. Let me tell you of Skadi, a giantess who became a goddess. She was the daughter of the giant Thiazi, who once kidnapped the goddess Idun and her apples of immortality. When the gods rescued Idun and killed Thiazi in the process, Skadi came to Asgard in full armor, ready to wage war in vengeance for her father's death. The listeners lean forward, intrigued by this fierce figure. But the gods, in a rare moment of wisdom, chose to make peace rather than war. They offered Skadi compensation for her father's death, including the right to choose a husband from among the gods themselves. There was one condition, however. She had to choose by looking only at their feet. Bjorn grins at the absurdity. Skadi looked at all the feet lined up before her, and chose the most beautiful pair, certain they must belong to Baldur, the most handsome of the gods. But when the owner of those feet stepped forward, it was not Baldur at all. It was Njord, god of the sea and seafaring, whose feet were beautiful from years of walking on soft sand and wading in gentle waters. The old skald chuckles. The marriage was not a happy one, I will admit. Skadi loved the mountains, the cold, the howling of wolves, and the silence of snow. Njord loved the sea, the warmth, the crying of gulls, and the crash of waves. They tried to compromise, spending 9 nights in Skadi's mountain hall, and then 9 nights in Njord's seaside home, but neither could be happy in the other's realm. Eventually, they parted ways, but not before Skadi had earned her place among the gods. Bjorn's voice fills with respect. Today, Skadi is honored as a goddess of winter, of skiing, of the hunt. She runs through the mountains on skis she made herself, bow in hand, hunting the creatures of the wild. She is fierce and proud and utterly independent, a giantess who became something more through her own strength and determination. When the winter wind howls through the peaks, some say it is Skadi's voice calling her hounds to the chase. He shifts in his chair, moving to another topic. Then there is Aegir, Lord of the Sea, another giant who has found his place among the gods. Aegir is as old as the oceans themselves, a being of such vast power that even Thor treats him with respect. He brews ale for the gods in a great cauldron that Thor himself retrieved from the giant Hymir, and his feasts are legendary throughout the 9 worlds. Bjorn's voice takes on a note of mystery. Aegir's wife is Ran, and she is far more dangerous than her husband. Ran loves gold, loves it with a passion that borders on madness, and she drags sailors down to her underwater halls to take their treasure. If you must travel by sea, wise sailors carry a piece of gold with them, something to offer Ran if she comes for them, a bribe to secure gentle treatment in her realm. A fisherman in the audience nods solemnly, touching a gold coin he wears on a chain around his neck. But not all the beings of the 9 worlds are giants or gods. Let us speak now of the dwarves, the Dvagar, the master craftsmen who live beneath the earth in Svartalfheim. We have mentioned them before, these clever folk who forged Thor's hammer and Odin's spear, but they deserve more attention than passing reference. Bjorn's voice warms with appreciation. The dwarves were born from the maggots that infested Ymir's flesh after his death, a humble origin for such remarkable beings. But do not let their origins deceive you. The dwarves have risen far above their beginnings. They have built vast halls in the caverns beneath the world, lit by the fires of their eternal forges. They have developed crafts and arts that even the gods cannot match. He ticks off examples on his gnarled fingers. Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, Gungnir, Odin's spear, Draupnir, the ring that multiplies itself, Skidbladnir, the ship that folds into a pocket, Gleipnir, the chain that binds Fenrir. All of these were made by dwarven hands, forged in dwarven fires, enchanted by dwarven magic. When the gods need something made that is beyond their own abilities, they turn to the dwarves. The old skald's voice carries a note of warning. But the dwarves are not servants of the gods, not subjects to be commanded. They are proud and independent, quick to take offense and slow to forgive. They drive hard bargains for their work, and woe to anyone who tries to cheat them. More than one god has found themselves in trouble after failing to honor a deal with a dwarf. He glances toward the ceiling of the mead hall. The dwarves rarely come to the surface, preferring the comfortable darkness of their underground realm. Sunlight, they say, turns them to stone, though whether this is literally true or merely a preference, I cannot say. But their works come to the surface often enough, traded and sold and stolen, spreading dwarven craftsmanship throughout the 9 worlds. Beyond shifts topics again. Above the dwarves, in realms of light and beauty, dwell the elves. There are 2 kinds of elves in the old tales. The light elves live in Alfheim, a realm of such radiance and grace that mortal eyes can barely perceive it. They are beings of pure beauty, of art and music and all things fair. Some say they are more beautiful even than the gods, though this may be flattery or exaggeration. His voice softens. The light elves rarely interact with mortals or even with the gods. They keep to their own realm, content in their own perfection, indifferent to the struggles and dramas of lesser beings. But sometimes, just sometimes, a mortal might catch a glimpse of them, dancing in a moonlit grove or singing beside a crystal stream. Such sights are never forgotten, and those who see them often spend the rest of their lives yearning to see them again. The fire flickers, casting strange shadows. The dark elves, or Svatofar, are another matter entirely. They dwell below the earth, like the dwarves, and indeed some say they are simply another name for dwarves. Others say they are a separate race related to the dwarves but distinct from them, beings of shadow and cunning rather than craft and creation. The truth is lost in the mists of time, and perhaps it does not matter. What matters is that the darkness beneath the world holds many secrets, many beings, many powers that even the gods do not fully understand. Bjorn's voice grows reverent. But of all the beings in the 9 worlds, perhaps none are more important than the Norns. These are the weavers of fate, the shapers of destiny, the ones who determine what shall be and what shall not be. Even Odin, with all his wisdom, cannot escape what the Norns have decreed. The whole falls silent at this, for fate is a heavy topic. There are 3 Norns, sisters who dwell at the base of Yggdrasil beside a well called Urd's Well. Their names are Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, which mean what was, what is becoming, and what shall be. Past, present, and future, woven together by 3 figures who sit and spin and cut the threads of every life in all the 9 worlds. Bjorn mimes the motion of spinning. Urd tends to the well, drawing water to pour over the roots of Yggdrasil, keeping the world tree alive and healthy. Verdandi spins the threads, drawing out the stuff of fate from raw possibility into defined reality. And Skuld cuts the threads when a life is done, her shears snipping through the weave with finality that cannot be appealed. His voice carries a note of acceptance. The Norns do not judge. They do not reward or punish. They simply weave, following patterns that perhaps even they do not fully understand. A hero may fall young, and a villain may live to old age, and neither outcome reflects the worthiness of the soul involved. Fate is not fair, The old stories tell us. Fate simply is. Bjorn looks around at his listeners. This is why the Norse do not despair at the idea of predetermined fate. If your thread is spun, if your end is woven, then there is no point in fear or worry. What will happen, will happen. Your only choice is how you face it. Will you meet your fate with courage, with honor, with a sword in your hand and a song on your lips? Or will you cower and whimper, trying to avoid what cannot be avoided? The fate is the same either way, only the manner of meeting it differs. The fire crackles approvingly. There are other beings I could tell you of, so many others. Ratatoskr, the squirrel who runs up and down Yggdrasil carrying insults between the eagle at the top and the dragon at the bottom. Nidhogg, that same dragon gnawing eternally at the tree's roots, trying to bring down the cosmos itself. The roosters who will crow to announce Ragnarok, the wolves who chase the sun and moon. The 9 worlds are full of wonders, full of terrors, full of beings beyond counting. Bjorn spreads his hands wide. But I think we have explored enough of this cosmic menagerie for one night. You understand now, I hope, that the universe of the old tales is not a simple place. It is complex, layered, full of competing powers and ancient grudges and delicate balances. The gods are mighty, but they are not alone. They share their home with giants and dwarves, elves and Norns, dragons and eagles, and countless other beings. He reaches for his mead horn, and all of them, every single one, from the highest god to the lowest creature, lives under the shadow of what is to come. All of them know that the current order of things is not permanent. All of them know that one day the threads will be cut, the wolves will catch their prey, and the fire will consume everything. The old skald drinks deeply, which brings us, my dear friends, to the darkest and most important part of our tale. We must speak now of the end. We must speak of Ragnarok. A shiver runs through the hall, though whether from cold or fear or anticipation no one can say. The fire burns low, and Bjorn Thundervoice prepares to tell the tale of the twilight of the gods. Someone rises to add more wood to the fire, and the flames leap up eagerly, as if knowing that the tale to come requires all the light and warmth that can be mustered. The shadows retreat to the corners of the mead hall, pushed back by the renewed blaze. Outside, the storm has quieted almost completely, leaving only the soft whisper of falling snow and the occasional creak of settling timbers. Bjorn Thundervoice watches the fire for a long moment, his weathered face reflecting the dancing light. When he speaks, his voice is softer than before, touched with a solemnity that makes even the youngest children fall silent. Ragnarok, he says, and the word hangs in the air like a prophecy. The doom of the gods, the twilight of the powers, the end of all things that are and the beginning of all things that will be. This is the fate that awaits the 9 worlds, the destiny that even Odin, with all his wisdom and sacrifice, cannot prevent. He looks around at his listeners, his ice-blue eyes meeting theirs one by one. Do not be afraid of this tale, my friends. Yes, it speaks of destruction and death, of fire and flood, of the passing of gods and the ending of ages, but it also speaks of rebirth, of renewal, of a new world rising from the ashes of the old. The Norse understood something that many others forget. Endings are not truly endings. They are transformations, doorways, passages from one state of being to another. Bjorn settles back in his chair. Let me tell you how it begins. The first sign of Ragnarok is a winter, unlike any winter before it. We call it Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter, the Terrible Winter. It will last not for one season, but for 3 full years, with no summer to break its grip, no spring to offer hope, no harvest to fill the storehouses. His voice grows cold, matching the tale he tells. Snow will fall from all directions at once. The sun will give no warmth, though it still crosses the sky. The rivers will freeze solid, the seas will ice over, the very breath in your lungs will crystallize and fall like diamonds. People will forget what warmth feels like, what green grass looks like, what the songs of birds sound like. The world will become a tomb of ice and silence. Several listeners pull their cloaks tighter, though the mead hall is warm. During Fimbulwinter, the bonds that hold society together will break. Brother will fight against brother. Father will slay son, and son will slay father. All oaths will be forgotten, all loyalties abandoned. Humans will become wolves to each other, fighting over the last scraps of food, the last drops of warmth, the last vestiges of hope. It will be the darkest time the world has ever known. Bjorn's voice drops to a whisper, and then, at the end of those 3 terrible years, the wolves will catch their prey. Skoll, who has chased the sun since the beginning of time, will finally catch her. His jaws will close around that golden chariot, and the sun will be devoured, plunging the world into darkness. Hati will catch the moon moments later, swallowing the silver light, leaving only the cold gleam of stars in an endless night. The fire crackles, and for a moment its light seems terribly precious. With the sun and moon gone, the stars themselves will fall from the sky, shaken loose by the convulsions that grip the cosmos. The earth will tremble, mountains will crack, trees will be uprooted. The great wolf Fenrir, bound for so long in his magical chains, will feel those chains snap at last. His howl of freedom will shake the roots of Yggdrasil itself. Bjorn's voice grows stronger. Loki, too, will break free from his torment. The bonds made from his son's entrails will rot and fall away, and the trickster will rise, his face scarred by centuries of dripping venom, his heart filled with rage and hatred for the gods who imprisoned him. He will go to Helheim and raise an army of the dead. Souls who harbor grudges against the gods, who yearn for vengeance even in their grey half-existence. The old skald stands, his voice swelling with the epic nature of his tale. From the frozen north will come the ship Naglfar, made entirely from the fingernails and toenails of the dead. This is why we clip the nails of those who die, my friends, to slow the building of that terrible vessel. Naglfar will be captained by the giant Rim, and it will carry an army of giants toward Asgard, their ancient hatred finally finding its outlet. He gestures toward the south. From Muspelheim will come Surtur, the fire giant who has waited since the beginning of time for this moment. His sword blazes brighter than the sun that has been devoured, and behind him march the sons of Muspelheim, beings of pure flame and destruction. They will cross the rainbow bridge Bifrost, and under their fiery feet the bridge will crack and crumble and fall. Bjorn's voice reaches a crescendo. The serpent Jormungandr will release its tail at last, rising from the depths of the sea in coils that span horizons. The waters will churn and flood across the land as the great beast heaves itself toward the battlefield. Its venom will poison the sky. Its bulk will crush everything in its path. The Midgard serpent goes to meet its destiny, and that destiny is war. He pauses, letting the images settle. All the forces of chaos will gather on a plain called Vigrid, a field so vast it stretches beyond sight, large enough to hold all the armies of destruction and all the defenders of order. And there, at last, the final battle will be joined. Bjorn's voice carries the weight of fate. Odin will ride forth on Sleipnir, his spear Gungnir gleaming in the strange light of a sunless world. Behind him will come the Einherjar, the chosen warriors of Valhalla, millions upon millions of the honored dead, their weapons bright, their courage undimmed by the darkness around them. Thor will stride at his father's side, Mjolnir crackling with lightning, his red beard bristling with fury. All the gods of Asgard will take the field, knowing they go to their deaths, going anyway because that is what it means to be a god. The fire blazes up as if in tribute. The battles that follow are almost too terrible to describe. Odin will face Fenrir, the All-Father against the Great Wolf, wisdom against hunger, age against rage. They will fight with all their power, and in the end, the wolf will win. Fenrir's jaws, which could swallow the moon, will swallow Odin himself, and the king of the gods will die in darkness, far from his golden hall. A child whimpers, and her father holds her close. But Odin's death will be avenged. His son Vidar, called the Silent God, will rush to face Fenrir. Vidar wears a special shoe made from all the leather scraps that have ever been cut from shoes and thrown away, stronger than any material in existence. With this foot, he will stand upon Fenrir's lower jaw, and with his hands he will grasp the wolf's upper jaw, and he will tear the great beast apart. Fenrir, who devoured Odin, will die screaming, split from jaw to tail. Bjorn's voice carries both sorrow and triumph. Thor will find his destiny in battle with Jormungandr, the serpent he once tried to lift in Utgard Loki's hall. The Thunder God and the World Serpent will clash in combat that shakes the foundations of reality. Thor's hammer will crash against the serpent's skull again and again, lightning illuminating the darkness with each blow. And finally, with one last tremendous strike, Thor will slay the beast. He pauses heavily, but as Jormungandr dies, it will spray its venom one last time. Thor will stagger back from the dying serpent, his enemy vanquished, his victory complete. He will take 9 steps, only 9, and then the strongest of all the gods will fall, killed by poison, killed by the death throes of his greatest foe. Thor and Jormungandr will die together, enemies bound by fate to destroy each other. The old skald's voice grows quieter. Freya will face Surtur, the fire giant with his blazing sword. But Freya gave away his own sword long ago, for love for a woman whose beauty made him forget wisdom. He will fight with an antler, with bare hands, with courage and desperation, but it will not be enough. Surtur's sword will find its mark, and Freya will fall, the lord of sunshine and harvest, dying as the world grows dark. Bjorn continues the litany of deaths. Tyr, the one-handed god of justice, will face the hellhound Garm, and they will kill each other. Heimdall, the watchman of Asgard, will fight Loki at last, and they will slay each other, the trickster and the guardian, ending their ancient enmity in mutual destruction. One by one the gods will fall, and one by one their enemies will fall with them. He spreads his arms wide. And when the battle is over, when the bodies of gods and giants alike litter the plain of Vigrid, Surtur will raise his blazing sword one final time. He will sweep it across the 9 worlds, and fire will consume everything. Yggdrasil will burn, Asgard will burn, Midgard will burn. Every realm, every creature, every blade of grass and drop of water will be devoured by flames that nothing can withstand. The fire in the mead halls seems suddenly too bright, too hot, too hungry. The earth will sink into the sea, vanishing beneath waves of fire and water mixed together. The stars that have not already fallen will wink out one by one until there is nothing left but darkness. Everything that was built, everything that was created, everything that was loved and hated and fought for and died for will be gone, as if it had never existed at all. Bjorn lets the silence stretch, letting his listeners feel the weight of absolute ending. This is Ragnarok. This is the fate that awaits gods and mortals alike. This is the destiny that Odin saw when he hung on Yggdrasil, the future he sacrificed his eye to glimpse. He knew it was coming. He spent ages trying to prevent it, or at least to face it with the best possible chance, and in the end, it came anyway, because fate cannot be cheated, only met. The old skald sits back down, his voice softening. But Ragnarok is not the end of the story. Remember what I said at the beginning. Endings are transformations, doors to new beginnings. The Norse did not believe in final endings, in absolute destruction. They believed in cycles, in seasons, in the eternal return of all things. Hope kindles in the eyes of the listeners. After the fire burns itself out, after the waters recede, something miraculous will happen. From the depths of nothingness, a new earth will rise, green and beautiful, washed clean of all the blood and sorrow of the old world. It will emerge from the sea like a dream of paradise. The sun will shine again, for the sun will have had a daughter before being devoured, a daughter who will take her mother's place in the sky. The stars will return, new constellations mapping new destinies. Bjorn's voice warms with wonder, and on this new earth, life will begin again. 2 humans will have survived Ragnarok, hidden in the branches of Yggdrasil throughout the destruction. Their names are Lif and Lifthrasir, which mean life and lover of life. They will emerge from their hiding place to find a world reborn, a world without the old enmities, without the old grudges, without the accumulated pain of ages. They will become the new Ask and Embla, the parents of a new humanity. He smiles gently. And the gods, some of them will return as well. Vidar and Vali, sons of Odin, will survive the battle. Thor's sons Modi and Magni will survive, and they will inherit Mjolnir, carrying on their father's legacy of protection. Honir, a god we have not spoken of tonight, will survive, and will become a leader in the new order. And most wonderfully of all, Baldur will return. The name brings tears to several eyes. Yes, Baldur, the shining one, the beautiful one, the best and brightest, who was slain by Loki's treachery. When the old world ends, Helheim will release its hold on the dead. Baldur will walk out of the grey halls radiant once more, restored to the life that was stolen from him. And with him will come his brother, Hodur, the blind god who threw the fatal dart. Forgiven at last, reconciled at last, united in the new world Bjorn's voice fills with peace. These surviving gods will gather and talk of the old times, remembering Odin's wisdom, Thor's strength, the days before Ragnarok. They will find Odin's chess pieces in the grass, golden figures from games played in happier ages, and they will begin again, building new halls, establishing new order, creating a new Asgard to watch over the new earth. He looks around at his listeners with warmth in his ancient eyes. This is the message of Ragnarok, my friends. Yes, all things end. Yes, even the gods must die. Yes, fire and darkness will consume everything you know and love. But from the ashes new life will grow. From the silence new songs will rise. From the ending will come a new beginning, perhaps better than what came before, certainly different but alive. Always alive. The fire burns steadily, a small echo of the great fire to come, and the light that will follow it. The Norse did not fear Ragnarok. They accepted it as they accepted winter, as they accepted death, as they accepted all the hard truths of existence. They knew that fighting against fate was useless, that the only choice was how to meet it, and so they chose to meet it with courage, with honor, with weapons in hand and songs on their lips. They chose to be worthy of the new world that would rise from the old. Bjorn reaches for his mead horn one last time, and that, my dear friends, is the tale of Ragnarok, the end that is not an end, the death that gives birth to life, the twilight that precedes a new dawn. May we all face our own endings with such courage. May we all be worthy of whatever comes after. He drinks deeply, and the listeners follow his example, toasting the end of worlds and the birth of new ones. The fire has burned down to glowing embers now, casting a soft orange light across the mead hall of Bjornsted. The hour is late, very late, and many of the younger children have fallen asleep in their parents' arms, their dreams no doubt filled with gods and giants, dragons and wolves, the wonders and terrors of the 9 worlds. But many listeners remain awake, their eyes fixed on old Bjorn Thundervoice, waiting for whatever final words he might offer. Outside, the storm has passed entirely. The wind has fallen to nothing, leaving a silence so profound that the crackling of embers sounds almost loud. Through the cracks in the shutters, the faintest hint of grey light is beginning to appear, the first promise of dawn creeping over the eastern mountains. The longest night is ending, and a new day is being born. Bjorn sits quietly for a long moment, gazing into the dying fire. His voice, when he finally speaks, is soft and contemplative, the voice of a man who has told all the tales he knows and now must find something more personal, more immediate to share. The stories are told, he says quietly, from the birth of the worlds to their eventual end, from Ginnungagap to Ragnarok, from Ymir to Lif and Lifdrasir. You have heard of gods and monsters, of heroes and villains, of sacrifice and betrayal and redemption. These are the tales my master taught me, and his master taught him, stretching back through generations beyond counting, back to the first skalds who sat by the first fires and tried to make sense of the vast and terrifying universe around them. He looks up at his listeners with those ice-blue eyes, still sharp despite his years. But why do we tell these stories? That is the question I find myself pondering on nights like this, when the fire burns low and the dawn approaches. Why do we gather in mead halls and speak of Odin's sacrifice, of Thor's battles, of Baldur's death and promised return? Why do we keep these old tales alive when we could spend our nights in other ways? Bjorn's voice carries a teacher's cadence now. Some would say we tell them for entertainment, and there is truth in that. The old stories are exciting, are they not? Full of adventure and drama, of monsters slain and treasures won, of loves found and lost. They capture the imagination, carry us away from our small daily concerns into worlds of wonder and possibility. On a cold winter night, with the storm howling outside, what better way to pass the time than to travel in our minds to golden Asgard or frozen Jotunheim? He nods slowly. But I think there is more to it than that. I think we tell these stories because they teach us something about ourselves, about what it means to be human in a world that often seems cruel and arbitrary and beyond our understanding. The embers shift in the fire pit, sending up a small shower of sparks. Think of Odin hanging on Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights, suffering agonies beyond description, all for the sake of wisdom. What does this tell us? It tells us that knowledge has a price, that nothing worth having comes easily, that we must be willing to sacrifice for the things we truly desire. Every child who struggles with a difficult lesson, every apprentice who labors long hours to master a craft, every adult who pushes through pain and exhaustion to achieve a goal, they are all following in Odin's footsteps, paying the price for what they seek. Bjorn's voice warms. Think of Thor, facing challenges in Utgard that he could not win, discovering later that he had been fighting forces beyond any mortal or god to overcome. What does this tell us? It tells us that sometimes we will fail despite our best efforts, that not all battles can be won through strength alone, but also that our failures may be more impressive than we realize. The man who loses a race to a faster opponent has still run his fastest. The woman who cannot lift a weight has still strained with all her strength. We are measured not by our victories, but by how we face our challenges, win or lose. He looks towards a young couple sitting close together near the fire. Think of Sigurd and Brynhilde, whose love was true, but whose fate was tragedy. What does this tell us? It tells us that love is real, that it matters, that it is worth pursuing even when the odds are against us. It tells us also that we cannot always have what we want, that the world does not arrange itself according to our desires, but it tells us too that love survives death, that Sigurd and Brynhilda found each other again in the halls of the dead. Love that is true endures. This is a comfort and a challenge, asking us to love truly while accepting that true love is often hard. The old skald's voice grows softer still. Think of Baldur, the brightest and best, struck down by treachery, mourned by all the worlds. What does this tell us? It tells us that goodness is vulnerable, that the best among us are often targets for jealousy and malice. It tells us that loss is inevitable, that even the gods cannot protect what they love most. But it tells us also that goodness is not defeated by death, that Baldur will return when the world is reborn. Evil may triumph for a time, but goodness endures. Bjorn stands slowly, his old joints protesting, and walks to the shuttered window nearest the fire. And think of Ragnarok itself, the end of all things, the destruction of gods and worlds, fire and darkness consuming everything. What does this tell us? It tells us that nothing lasts forever, that even the mightiest powers must face their end. This could be a source of despair, and for some perhaps it is. But for those who truly understand the old tales, it is a source of freedom. He turns back to face his audience. If everything ends, then nothing we do can prevent that ending. We are free from the burden of trying to hold back the inevitable. We can stop fighting against fate and start focusing on something more important: how we live the time we have. We can stop worrying about building something eternal and start focusing on building something good. We can stop fearing death and start embracing life. The first true light of dawn begins to creep through the cracks in the shutters, grey and soft and full of promise. The Norse heroes knew they would die. They knew Ragnarok was coming, and they fought anyway, loved anyway, built and created and sang anyway. They did not do these things because they thought they would last forever. They did them because doing them was good, was right, was what it meant to be fully alive. They did them because a life without courage, without love, without creation is not really life at all, regardless of how long it lasts. Bjorn walks slowly back to his chair and sits down with a contented sigh. This is what the old stories teach us, my friends. Not facts about gods who may or may not exist. Not histories of events that may or may not have happened, but truths about how to live, how to face suffering, how to love, how to die. They teach us that we are small but not insignificant, that our lives are brief but not meaningless, that we face forces beyond our control but are not helpless against them. He looks around the hall one final time. The fire is burning low, and the dawn is coming. Soon, you will return to your homes, to your daily lives, to the 1,000 small tasks and concerns that fill our days. You will milk cows and mend nets, bake bread and forge iron, tend children and care for elders. These things may seem small compared to the grand adventures of gods and heroes. His voice fills with warmth, but they are not small. Every act of love, every moment of courage, every choice to do right when wrong would be easier. These are the stuff of which true heroism is made. You do not need to slay dragons or wrestle with giants to be worthy of the halls of the honored dead. You need only to live your life with courage and honor, to face your own personal Ragnaroks, your own trials and losses and endings, with the same spirit the gods will show when they ride out to their final battle. The dawn light is growing stronger now, pushing back the darkness that has held the world all night. Remember the old stories. Tell them to your children, and bid them tell their children. Keep the fire burning, not just in your hearths, but in your hearts. Remember Odin's wisdom and Thor's strength. Remember Baldur's goodness and Sigurd's courage. Remember that endings are beginnings, that winter gives way to spring, that the sun devoured will have a daughter who rises in her place. Bjorn Thundervoice raises his mead horn one final time to the old gods then, to the new day, to all of you who have listened with such patience through the long night. May your lives be worthy of the tales that will be told about them. May you face your fate with courage, and may you find warmth and fellowship and good stories to see you through the darkest nights. He drinks, and the others drink with him, a final toast as the dawn breaks fully over the mountains. Outside, the world is transformed. The storm has left behind a landscape of pristine white, snow covering every surface, glittering in the first rays of sunlight like a million scattered diamonds. The sky is clear, a pale blue that deepens toward the west where the last stars are fading. The air is cold but still, crisp and clean, and full of the promise of a new day. One by one, the villagers begin to stir, gathering sleeping children, wrapping themselves in cloaks and furs for the short walk back to their homes. They move quietly, reluctant to break the spell that the night stories have woven, carrying within them the words and images that Bjorn has shared. Some pause at the door to look back at the old skald, still sitting in his carved chair by the dying fire, and they nod their thanks before stepping out into the brightness. Finally, only a few remain. A young mother lingers with her sleeping daughter in her arms. An old fisherman sits on his bench, too comfortable to move just yet. A boy of perhaps 12 stands near the door, looking back at Bjorn with something like worship in his eyes. "Thank you," the young mother says softly. She will dream of Valkyries and heroes tonight. She will remember this when she is old. Bjorn smiles gently. That is all any storyteller can hope for, that the tales we tell will live on in those who hear them, passed down like treasures from generation to generation. The fisherman rises at last, stretching his old back with a groan. "You spin a fine tale, Bjorn, finer than any I have heard in all my years. The old gods would be proud to have such a voice keeping their memory alive." "The old gods have many voices," Bjorn replies. "Mine is just one among countless. As long as there are people who remember, the gods are never truly gone." The boy at the door finally finds his courage to speak. "Will you teach me?" he asks, his voice cracking slightly with adolescent uncertainty. "Will you teach me to tell the stories the way you do?" Bjorn studies the boy for a long moment, seeing in him echoes of himself at that age, hungry for words, for meaning, for a purpose larger than the small daily round of village life. Finally he nods. Come back tomorrow evening, young one. Come with an empty stomach and a full heart. The training of a skald is long and difficult, but I think perhaps you have the gift. Yes, I think perhaps you do. The boy's face breaks into a grin so bright it rivals the dawn. He dashes out the door without another word, running home to tell his family to begin counting the hours until tomorrow evening. Bjorn watches him go, then turns back to the dying fire. The mead hall is empty now, save for himself and the ravens in the rafters. The blackbirds watch him with their clever eyes, and he could almost swear they are nodding in approval. Well, he says to himself, or perhaps to the gods who may or may not be listening, the night's work is done. The stories have been told. Now it is time for this old man to rest. He pulls a fur blanket over his lap and settles deeper into his chair. The embers glow softly, giving off just enough warmth to keep the cold at bay. Outside, he can hear the sounds of the village coming to life, people calling greetings to one another, animals being fed. The ordinary, beautiful noise of lives being lived. His eyes drift closed. In his mind, he sees Yggdrasil, the world tree, its branches stretching up into infinite light, its roots plunging down into unfathomable depths. He sees the 9 worlds hanging like fruit among its branches, teeming with life and conflict and wonder. He sees Odin on his high seat watching over everything, his single eye gleaming with terrible wisdom. He sees Thor riding across the sky and his chariot pulled by goats, lightning crackling in his wake. He sees Baldur, bright and beautiful, waiting in Hell's grey halls for the new world that will come after fire consumes the old. And he sees himself, one small mortal man in one small village in one small corner of Midgard, doing his part to keep the old stories alive, passing the torch to a new generation, adding his voice to the endless chain of voices that stretches back to the beginning and forward to whatever ending awaits. The fire crackles one last time and settles into quiet embers. The ravens ruffle their feathers and close their eyes. Outside, the sun rises higher, flooding the world with light and warmth, pushing back the memory of the storm, promising spring after winter, life after death, beginnings after endings. Bjorn Thundervoice sleeps, and in his dreams, the gods walk beside him. And that, my dear friends, is where we will end tonight's story. I hope you found warmth and wonder in these tales from the frozen north, in these myths that have echoed down through the centuries from a people who faced the darkness with courage, and the cold with fellowship, and the certainty of death with songs of defiance and hope. The Norse gods may belong to another age, but the truths they taught are eternal, that wisdom comes at a price, that courage is its own reward, that endings are beginnings, and that even in the darkest winter, spring will come again. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay safe and sweet dreams.